From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're a longtime fan reliving these monumental events or a newcomer eager to understand wrestling's rich history, you're in the right place. This episode is packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises along the way. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. November 8, 1999 Observer Newsletter. Life and Death of Owen Hart documentary. Rings Tournament. By Dave Meltzer. The most publicized story ever in North American pro wrestling. The tragic death of Owen Hart on May 23rd is brought vividly back to life with the documentary The Life and Death of Owen Hart. The one-hour piece debuted in Ontario on TVO on November 3rd, in the rest of Canada on November 6th on the A channel, and will be part of A&E's Bio Week on Pro Wrestling, with a November 16th showing. The film was still having the final editing touches put on at press time, as there are apparently numerous changes from version we are reviewing. It's a tearjerker, with a lot of home video footage of Hart with his two young children, Ouya and Athena. The most powerful part of the movie is the fact that producers Paul J. and Sally Blake, who also produced the highly acclaimed Wrestling with Shadows, made the point to bring out that this was a real person with a real family who just happened to be a pro wrestler. This portrayal of Hart in all the family home movies made it impossible to dismiss the repercussions of it, even though it's a business that has built up thick calluses because deaths happen with such frequency. Perhaps the most powerful scene was from Martha Hart talking about why she invited Vince McMahon to the funeral, saying, "I wanted him to realize, you guys are so desensitized from all the garbage that you put in your show you don't even realize the degree of pain that's being caused here, and I want to show you Owen in the coffin, that he was really gone and he was really taken from me, and this is what really happened. This is reality. This is a story more about a young family that had the rest of its life mapped out ahead of time. Just a few days, literally, before they were to live out their dream in their new home, and a few years before Hart had saved enough money to come home for good, that all his hard work at an arduous job and saving every penny possible along the way to create almost an idyllic family life in the long run, was crushed for good. It's a story that will probably play stronger among women than men, and far stronger among non-wrestling fans than wrestling fans. For wrestling fans, particularly those who followed Hart's career from its inception, there may be some disappointment in the broad life story of Hart. The movie established that he was a very good amateur and pro wrestler, but it really didn't come across just how good he was at both. It was clear that both amateur and pro wrestling were not worlds he chose, but worlds that he was more or less was drafted into, and that, ultimately, he would never fully escape from. Hart didn't like amateur wrestling, but since Stu's career as a full-time wrestler had wound down, he had more time to raise and teach Owen, who was the best natural athlete in the family, wrestling than any of the older brothers, and Owen stayed with wrestling to not disappoint his father. His amateur wrestling, much like Brett's, was living out his father's dream of having a member of the family represent Canada in wrestling at the Olympics. Something Stu's shot at doing was taken away by the Olympics being cancelled due to World War II, and much as their grandfather, Helen's father, did at the turn of the century in track for the United States. But Owen didn't like the pressure of being an amateur wrestler, particularly because he had to live up to the Hart name in high school and college at a time when his older brothers were already local celebrities on the Stampede wrestling circuit, and his father was the legendary area tough guy who tortured all the football players and weightlifters who thought they were tough. It was interesting to see Hart himself. Much of the footage of Hart was filmed when the same company was doing the Wrestling with Shadows film in 1997 about his older brother, and you'll notice many similar scenes and photos from that film and this talk about getting a wrestling scholarship to the University of Calgary, where it never mentions how he was one of the top college wrestlers in the country, and in hindsight wished he hadn't, because his time on the wrestling team took away from his studying time and he felt he screwed up his priorities of what he should have gone to college for in the first place. Since he was on scholarship, when the college dropped its wrestling program after Hart's junior year, where he placed second in the Canadian National Championships, he wound up being drafted into pro wrestling rather than finishing and getting his degree. He had fooled around in pro wrestling, and it was more or less a given that he'd try it, given that all his older brothers and several brothers-in-law were doing it, and he took to it more naturally than any of the others. Within about a month or two, he was having classic matches with rivals like Hasei Hiroshi, wrestling under a mask, and later Makan Singh, and was the biggest star in Stampede Wrestling and the hottest young performer in the business. Area wrestling legend Bad News Alan Coage, rival of Hart in Stampede rings, noted how he at first didn't like Hart, seeing him as a pretty boy member of the owning family who was booked to never lose, but ended up liking and respecting him because he was a good person. His reputation as a ribber was talked about, in particular by Brian Knobbs and brother Brett, although not nearly in as colorful terms as would have been possible had there been more time. Although I don't profess to have been close with Owen Hart, and certainly not over the past several years, the stories that he hated pro wrestling, at least in the early stages of his career, as portrayed here seem exaggerated. He did have his priorities straight and his family was always first. He was notorious when working for the WWF for living a very tame lifestyle on the road and saving every penny possible. He didn't like what pro wrestling and the WWF had turned into over the last year or two of life and was one of the few in the company who would say so publicly. Living for his family first, and his priorities not being pro wrestling first, is a priority structure different from many in the industry, as noted in the film by Mick Foley. Foley was the only WWF wrestler that was part of the movie, as there was a company directive, whether in writing or not, for wrestlers not to cooperate with this film, and apparently Foley, out of respect for Hart, cooperated anyway, both facts of which speak volumes. But it's hard to believe someone would go all over the world to learn and actually master every different style, something among modern wrestlers. Really only Chris Benoit can say they went everywhere and mastered every style, was the same person who hated wrestling. The people who hate wrestling but do so because they can make a good living at it, usually wrestle like Lex Luger, not like Owen Hart. It should also be noted that I was featured in this, including falling victim to my own personal pet peeve of simplifying the changes in wrestling brought on as a result of a war between Vince McMahon and Ted Turner. Wrestling fans who followed Hart's career will be disappointed from a history basis, but maybe it's fair the way it was presented because, even though Hart gained his fame inside the ring, his priorities were outside the ring, just as this film emphasized. But still, the story of the life of Owen Hart without mentioning his wrestling trips to Europe and Mexico, let alone his stardom in Japan even in one-hour form, comes off as incomplete. His career was presented as if he started out and became an immediate star in Stampede Wrestling, although just how good he was in the ring for the standards of that time doesn't come across. Went to the WWF as the Blue Blazer, where he was asked to lose every match and eventually quit. Blue Blazer was never given the big push, but he was very popular for an undercard wrestler initially and won all his undercard matches for several months until the decision was made to not push him because of his size, and the losses started becoming more regular. He went back home, and when Stampede folded, he tried to get into the fire department, and when that failed, went back to work in the WWF, where he was buried in an undercard tag team, the forgettable High Energy with Coco Ware, before his famous break came when he feuded with his older brother, and he remained a top star until his death. Footage was shown of the night he accidentally injured Steve Austin with a tombstone piledriver at the 1997 SummerSlam in East Rutherford, New Jersey, and his thoughts, while standing there knowing he was supposed to lose the Intercontinental title in this match, while Austin laid motionless and temporarily paralyzed, in what he himself described as the longest 20 seconds of his career, and ended with a decision to transparently pin himself, saw him question his and others' wrestling-bred reactions to the tragedy of not dropping the facade and getting the EMTs in and having the match stop immediately. However, the impact on Hart's career, in that Austin, when he became the biggest star in the industry months later, refused to work a Natural Grudge program with him, was never gone into. Perhaps most eerie in hindsight was Hart's 1997 conversations and footage from the previous year being shown of his nephew Matthew, the son of local gym owner B.J. Annis and sister Georgia, who was a teenager training to be a third-generation Hart family member in the business, and who suddenly became ill with a rare disease and died in the summer of 1996. The irony of Hart talking about how suddenly life can end was a weird jolt, not unlike the footage, looking down from the catwalk 90 feet above the floor at Kemper Arena, where everyone is forced to leave the fantasy world again to see exactly what the last seconds of Hart's life looked like. The story about the Survivor Series in Montreal was repeated, with Martha and Brett saying he wanted to leave but was trapped by his WWF contract. The WWF has, at least since his death, maintained Hart was given the option of leaving but chose to stay, trying to use that as evidence that even his own brother didn't think what happened at Survivor Series was that big a deal. From my own knowledge of the situation as things went down during this period, which is pretty detailed, Hart felt trapped between doing the right thing for loyalty to Brett, while doing the right thing for his career and family. He felt his options were to quit wrestling or return to the WWF, and like it or not, pro wrestling was how he made a very good living to provide for his family. I don't believe the option was ever given to him of basically giving back more 6 months of income as a penalty, but if it had, I also don't think it was a decision he would have wanted to make. He was not as vocal about the incident at the time as Davey Boy Smith was and didn't push as hard for a release. Smith was allowed out of his contract provided he pay the WWF a $150,000 fine, which was later negotiated down to $100,000, half of which WCW agreed after the fact to pay. It was during this period that McMahon threatened Bret with a lawsuit, claiming by discussing this situation with Owen he was tampering with his contracted personnel. To soothe Owen's feelings, he was promised a huge push as the company's new Canadian superstar, and his career would skyrocket with Bret not there. He was also given a raise from $250,000 per year to $400,000 for the remaining years of his contract. That promised status never materialized for a variety of factors, probably most importantly Shawn Michaels' initial refusal to drop the European title to him. Then, before a headline program could ever get started, Michaels suffered a career-ending injury. In the storyline, and Hart came back to the WWF for the specific purpose of getting back at Michaels for Montreal. The decision to make McMahon a heel character based on Montreal came about a month later, and by that point it was clear Austin should be the one he was married to. He wound up on the short end of a feud with Helmsley, and didn't get over to the degree it was thought. He was then overshadowed by Rock in his next role as co-leader of the Nation, and largely fell into the middle of the cards, where he wound up paired with Jarrett in a tag team of good workers in the ring built around Deborah as the star. The last year of his career was portrayed as him mainly saying no to various sexual angles. There were incidents described as suggestions of Goldust sticking his hands down his pants, and of Deborah rubbing his crotch, and the more well-known angle where he'd have a crush on Deborah, causing a rift between himself and Jeff Jarrett, all of which he turned down. It was portrayed as him going on the catwalk to do a stunt that he clearly didn't want to do, was because of pressure he'd put on himself for saying no to so many angles. His mother described the final time she saw him alive as him being so disgusted with the direction of the business that when wrestling was brought up, he said he no longer wanted to talk about it. The aftermath of the death, such as not stopping the show, airing the funeral footage on Raw, and some funeral footage and graveside footage does air in this piece, is not gone into, perhaps not to detract the viewers from what the producers felt was the most powerful message the movie should send. McMahon, who was not made a focal point of this piece, nor was he interviewed for it, although he appears in several clips either from the filming of Shadows or various news clips, comes off badly when they air a confrontation where he snapped at a reporter in St. Louis the day after Hart's death when she simply asked about why there was no backup safety wire on his rigging device. If you're looking for more answers as to what really happened to cause Hart's death, there are none. Nor are any potential answers even hinted. If you're looking for something to remind yourself of how great a performer this man who died prematurely was, as one would expect an A&E bio to focus on, you'll be disappointed. But this is still a must-see. Behind all the headlines and media posturing at the time, words and lawsuits back and forth, but are still ongoing bitterness, passion, and even deceit, comes the most basic of reality that after everyone else has moved on, a few people, who have been largely forgotten in the 5 months since this has happened, will never, even for a moment, achieve their lifelong dream of someday being a normal family. The first preliminary round of the 32-man Rings World Mega Battle Open Tournament King of Kings on October 28 at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym 2 ended with 4 men advancing to the finals. Brazilians Renato Babalu and Antonio Nogueira, along with former U.S. Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler Dan Henderson and Rings regular Ilyakhin Mikhail. The first of 3 tournament shows, before an announced sellout crowd of 4,520, some reports have the real number pegged at closer to 3,600, where the ultimate winner gets $223,000, was the first of 2 preliminary nights of 16-man tournaments with 2 rounds. The first 2 nights each end with 4 men advancing to a one-night 8-man tournament final in Tokyo in February. The second tournament takes place December 22nd in Osaka. While there were many fighters with some good credentials, the tournament thus far has been plagued by a lack of fighters with superstar name value. Babalu reached the finals with an armbar submission on Rings regular and former Olympic wrestler Gram Zaza of Georgia, that's Soviet Georgia, not Atlanta, in 1:11 of the second 5-minute round. Matches are fought with 2 5-minute rounds, with them going to the judges if no submission or knockout is rendered. And a decision win over another Rings regular, Lee Hasdell of England. Nogueira was most impressive, scoring 2 quick submissions, beating frequent Rings headliner Valentin Overeem in 1:51 with an armbar and following with a win over Russian Yuri Korchikin. Korchikin's opponent, Alistair Overeem, was a last-second replacement for one of the tournament favorites, Gilbert Yvel, who apparently was there and injured just before fight time, which may very well be true in this instance, but 90% of the time something like that is announced, it is usually a last-minute money problem. Yvel holds wins this year over both Semishult and Tsuyoshi Kosaka. Nogueira, said to be the best ground technician in the tournament, beat Korchikin with an armbar in 40 seconds. Henderson, who represented the United States in both the 1992 and 1996 Olympics at 181 pounds in Greco-Roman wrestling and remains active as a world-class wrestler today, has never lost an MMA rules match, including winning tournaments in both the UFC and in Brazil. His lone loss in this genre was in a pure submission rules match to Frank Shamrock in 40 seconds, knocked out Gajits Bakuri in 2:17 with a knee, and followed winning a decision over Ring's regular and former UWFI pro wrestler Hiromitsu Kanehara. Kanehara in his preliminary round had ended the long winning streak of UFC regular Jeremy Horn. I believe it was something like a 25-match winning streak, although that streak was under different rules than this match, who would have had a pretty substantial size edge on the 5'6", 208-pound Kanehara. Horn is 6'2" and 230 pounds, with a victory via decision in what was called a very close fight. Mikhail defeated Justin McCulley, who has done some pro wrestling for the UFO organization as well as worked indies in California, Justin Sane, with a footlock in 4:48, and followed beating another pro wrestler, Minneapolis indie Brad Kohler, who had Road Warrior Animal, a pro wrestling legend in Japan, as his second, with an armbar in 2:16. Kohler, coming off one of the most devastating knockout wins in UFC history on September 24, scored the biggest name win of his shoot career in the first round, beating Yoshihisa Yamamoto with a crossface submission across the nose in just 1:57 after doing heavy damage, including possibly breaking Yamamoto's ribs with body punches. Horn and Kohler were both booked through Monty Cox, the Extreme Challenge promoter, who also acted as a judge, which was controversial in itself as he judged matches involving his own fighters, including ruling Horn versus Kanehara as a draw. Both worked the previous UFC show, and there was apparently an informal talent trade type of allowance made in that they worked this tournament, and in exchange, Ring's president Akira Maeda allowed Kosaka to work the Japanese UFC pay-per-view show on November 14. Maeda had allowed Kosaka to work previous UFC shows, but none were in the Japanese market. Aaron Alvarado Nieves, who wrestled under the name Brasso Cibernetico and had gained his most fame in the early 80s as Robin Hood of Los Arqueros, passed away on the late afternoon of October 27 from acute pancreatitis. Alvarado, who was 33, was hospitalized 5 days earlier when his pancreas shut down and immediately was labeled in grave condition. There were no immediate hints as to what caused the disease, which in most cases is caused by either gallstones or alcohol abuse. In about 15% of the cases the cause is unknown. His funeral was held the next afternoon in Mexico City, attended by all his family members except his most famous brother, who couldn't get back from Acapulco, where he was wrestling, in time. As the son of one of the biggest stars in the history of Mexican pro wrestling, Black Shadow, who was also known as Alejandro Cruz, he was part of perhaps the largest pro wrestling family in existence, with about a dozen brothers who wrestled in Mexico, the most famous of them being Super Porky, Brasso de Plata, many of whom married woman wrestlers. He followed his older brothers, who became one of Mexico's most famous trios in history, Los Brazos, Brasso de Oro and Brasso de Plata and El Brasso, into wrestling, and had his first pro match at the age of 13, back in 1979. Unlike other younger brothers, he didn't take the Brasso moniker, and instead was part of a high-flying team called Los Arqueros, which means the Archers, with Danny Boy and Lasser, a comedy team aimed at young children. On January 21, 1990, they became the first comedy team ever to win the Mexican National Trios Championships when they defeated Los Temerarios, Black Terry and Jose Luis Feliciano and Shu El Guerrero in Mexico City, holding them until August 17, 1990, when they lost them to Los Thundercats, Leono Integro and Pantro. After losing his Robin Hood mask, he wrestled for several years as Super Atomo before losing his mask and finally donning the Brasso name. His final match was October 17, teaming with Rocky Santana and Kid Flash versus Danny Boy and Gallego and Bronco in Tlalnepantla. He had 3 sons, the youngest, Robin, named after his first wrestling character, who is now 10, is interested in becoming a third-generation wrestler. He was rushed to El Hospital de Urgencias de la Villa in Mexico City on October 22 when his pancreas shut down. In a semi-shoot angle, after VADER captured his second Triple Crown World Championship in All Japan on October 30 at the company's 27th anniversary show at Budokan Hall, the foreign wrestlers in the company began a push to get VADER elected Pro Wrestling MVP. VADER this past year won the Triple Crown twice along with the Champion Carnival Tournament, and headlined before the biggest crowd in all Japan history. The official Japanese media pro wrestling awards are highly political and structured. A foreign wrestler can't win the MVP award, much like a junior heavyweight wrestler can't, nor can a junior heavyweight match, no matter how good, win the Match of the Year award. In addition, the politics dictate that the awards are spread around the various companies. There is little doubt that VADER was the MVP of Japan this year, because his joining the company, providing Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi with a new main event opponent, was the biggest thing of the year and kept the company from falling even farther at the box office, particularly after the death of Shohei Baba and the fact that Toshiaki Kawada missed most of the year with injuries. VADER was given the title in 12-12 in the main event of the show using a power bomb as the finish. VADER used 3 released German suplexes and 2 splashes early for near falls. Misawa came back with 2 German suplexes of his own and also hit his elbow suicida, a tope ending with an elbow smash. VADER power bombed Misawa outside the ring to set up a pin attempt. Misawa came back with a missile dropkick and his Tiger Driver finisher, but VADER kicked out, before VADER came back with the power bomb to end what was reported as a great show. Before the match, Motoko Baba, holding a photo of her husband, along with Stan Hansen, Akira Taue and Misawa came to ringside for a ceremony honoring the company's anniversary, and Baba, who started what was one of the most successful pro wrestling companies in history back in 1972. At that point they announced the teams for the annual World Tag League Tournament, the traditional highlight tour of the year, which this year opens November 13th at Korakuen Hall with the finals on December 3rd at Budokan Hall. On paper, it appears the current double tag team champions, Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, who retained their titles in the previous match, beating Yoshihiro Takayama and Takao Mori in 14:54 when Kobashi pinned Takayama after a lariat, would be favored to repeat last year's win. The other teams will be Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa, Takayama, and Omori, Tamon Honda and Masao Inoue, Taue and Hansen, Johnny Ace and Mike Burton, formerly Bart Gunn, VADER and Johnny Smith and Gary Albright and Wolf Hockfield. Due to some computer problems from the weekend, the Monday night ratings for November 1st were unavailable at press time. We also don't have much in the way of details on the Thursday ratings for October 28th other than SmackDown doing a 4.3 and Thunder doing a 2.2. For the weekend numbers, Livewire did a 1.8, Superstars did a 1.9 and Sunday Night Heat did a 2.78. The Heat number was a significant drop from the normal figure, which has been in the mid-3s to mid-4s in recent weeks. The Hut levels number of people watching television overall at that hour was not down from usual levels, so that eliminates the fewer people watching TV because of Halloween explanation for that rating. WCW Saturday Night was just above its record low levels doing a 1.4. It was clearly bad news for ECW on October 29th, as its audience dropped 34% from the previous 2 weeks' high water marks, doing in 0.79 rating and 1.4 share. There's no real explanation, as it opened with about a 30% lower audience than the show has opened with the previous few weeks. It also declined slightly after its first quarter peak as the show went on, which is becoming typical for ECW. It's now 3 straight weeks with the same audience declining from the first quarter pattern, but is unusual among wrestling shows that go unopposed by another wrestling show. Even WCW Saturday Night, the least talked about wrestling show every week, generally has the audience grow throughout the show. For the first time, it was also not the highest rated show on TNN for the night, as the Professional Bull Riding World Championships that aired from 10 p.m. to midnight did in 0.96. Roller Jam, which followed ECW, did in 0.60. Mexico. Wolf Ruvinsky, one of Mexico's all-time most famous wrestling legends from the 50s during the El Santo era, who was actually more famous as an actor, was hospitalized on October 25th after a minor stroke and was in very bad condition in intensive care unit as of November 1st. His mother-in-law just passed away 2 weeks ago. EMLL announced its final show at Arena Mexico, which traditionally is one of the 2 major shows of the year, the other being the anniversary card, would be on December 3rd. They also announced that before that this month they are planning on both a Legend of the Silver Mask tournament to honor El Santo, which has become an annual affair, plus the International Grand Prix tournament. EMLL told promoters of the November 7th show in Tlalnepantla to cancel the main event, billed as Pero Aguayo's final match in Tlalnepantla, or else they would no longer allow any of their talent to work for the promoters. After being questioned in the death of a woman he was in a Tijuana hotel room with and him disappearing, things must have been settled because Jerry Estrada is now working regularly in AAA. The October 29th Arena Mexico show was headlined by another 3-way trios match. This time it was Pierroth Jr. and Villano Tercero and Fuerza Guerrera winning over Brazo de Plata and Tarzan Boy and Emilio Charles Jr. and Paulo Dantes and Mascara Ano 2000 and Universo 2000. It was also the 20th anniversary of Negro Casas' pro debut, and he had 3 singles matches, draws with Guerrera and Blue Panther, and a pin on Scorpio Jr. Basically Guerrera and Panther wrestled him for a few minutes and then just left. On television, they promoted Casas he was the biggest wrestling star in history, bringing his wife, his 4th daughters and 2 sisters out, and even interviewed Heavy Metal and Tropicazes, his brother and father respectively, who both worked for the rival AAA, for the segment on television. The November 5th Arena Mexico is headlined by Mr. Niebla and Atlantis and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. vs. Shocker and Villano Tercero and Pierroth and Casas and Tarzan Boy and Felino vs. Blue Panther and Fuerza Guerrera and Dr. Wagner Jr. EMLL Mini Tritancito will be out the rest of the year after an injury suffered on October 24th. Also Mini Justiciero will be out the rest of the year after an injury the same day from an auto accident. On the October 26th Arena Coliseo show, they had a mass before the card started for Oro, who died 6 years earlier at Arena Mexico. Astro Rey Jr. retained the Mexican national middleweight title beating Karloff Lagarde Jr. in Netzahualcoyot. Andy Barrow lost his first hair match in his 11-year career on October 31st in Tlalnepantla to Rocky Santana in a bloodbath. The Stips started as a match where Santana and Barrow teamed, losing to Justiciero and Danny Boy, and the Stips were the losing team then had to wrestle each other in a singles match with the loser getting their head shaved. November 5th in Tijuana will be an AAA show headlined by Octagon and Latin Lover and La Parca Jr. vs. Headhunters and Jacques Mate and Pero Aguayo Jr. and Cimarron and Oriental vs. Abismo Negro and Sangre Chicana and Cobarde. On October 31st in Morelia, they had a match with Heavy Metal facing Abdias Irison, advertised ahead of time as a mystery opponent and billed as the current Mexican national heavyweight kickboxing champion. Metal won the match. Lady Apache publicly ripped the EMLL because the women were only booked once since June at Arena Mexico. Alfonso Solorzano of the EMLL office responded by saying that EMLL considers the women less of an attraction than the minis, saying basically that they aren't very good and that women's wrestling in Mexico will either have to improve and modernize or die. EMLL did publicly acknowledge that they have broken ties with Victor Quiñones, as reported here a few weeks ago, but claimed they are still working with WWF and that Gigante Silva would return on November 28. Silva will be coming in through the end of the year, but WWF's business with EMLL it appears will be through after that point. Silva himself asked to go back to Mexico, but no other WWF talent is expected to be booked here. EMLL is trying to convince Tarzan Boy to remain a pro wrestler, and he's talking seriously about retiring and trying to become a lawyer. All Japan. They are continuing to keep Stan Hansen and Akira Taue together and pushing them in finishes to make them seem like a threat for the tag team tournament. With VADER teaming with Johnny Smith instead of Gary Albright, he's been taken out of a position to be involved with a team that has a potential of winning the tournament. Motoko Baba wanted an added show on January 31st at Korakuen Hall, which would coincide with the 1-year anniversary of Shohei Baba's death. The day after losing the Triple Crown, Mitsuharu Misawa gave a speech at Waseda College in Tokyo and said he was all banged up from the VADER match, with his back, shoulders and neck all bothering him. New Japan. Jesse Ventura is currently on a week-plus trip to Japan in an attempt to boost Japanese tourism into Minnesota. Ventura was scheduled to have several meetings with Masa Saito of the New Japan office, who was his former tag team partner as the Far East-West Connection in 1983 to 1984 before Ventura jumped from AWA to WWF. Keiji Muto, on the other hand, was planning on leaving Japan for Minnesota on November 3rd to get more shots in his bad knees and would be back in Japan on November 21st. It appears that Muto vs. Genichiro Tenryu for the IWGP Heavyweight title will headline New Japan's last big show of the millennium on December 10th in Osaka. They're also doing some sort of an angle involving the junior heavyweights with Jushin Liger leaving. The idea is that Koji Kanemoto and Shinjiro Otani are claiming Liger is washed up, so he's going to leave because it would then show he's needed for the division because he's got so much more name value. Weekly Gong printed an interview with Riki Choshu this week where he said he's in shape to wrestle at any time. Atsushi Onita on October 31st claimed he had a consultation with Dr. Kaoru Tomioka, a clinic in Urayasu, who told him he only has 6 months left in his career due to knee problems. The doctor said if Onita goes any longer he wouldn't be able to walk the stairs. There are stairs everywhere in Tokyo, because his knee cartilage would have worn completely out. Onita was first advised to retire back in 1983 when he destroyed his knee and was out nearly 1 full year. He said he wanted a match with Choshu before he has to retire. The company also held a press conference announcing Bill Goldberg and Chemo for the January 4th Dome show. Current tour ended on November 1st in Hiroshima before 5,200 fans. Building holds 6,500, with Muto and Satoshi Kojima beating Masahiro Chono and Akira in the main event. The tour was headlined every night by NWO vs. Team 2000 matches. Yutaka Yoshi, a prelim wrestler with the company, left November 1st for 3 weeks of training in Calgary under Joe Daigo, before he goes to Germany full-time. Other Japan notes. The first H vs. Fake Hayabusa match on October 29th at Korakuen Hall before 2,150 fans saw them do the much ballyhooed fart spot where Fake Hayabusa put the fire up H's butt. During the match, H broke a $100,000 television camera on the ring post. American woman wrestlers Jazz and Malia Hasaka made surprise appearances at the show, attacking Emi Motokawa and Kaori Nakayama to set up a 2-against-3 match with Nakayama and Motokawa vs. Miss Mongol and Hasaka and Jazz for the November 23 Yokohama Arena show. Masaaki Sadake, in what may be part of his angle with K1, was at the Rings tournament on October 28 and talked about returning to that promotion. Sadake was the number 2 star in the original Rings promotion in the 1992 era, doing many worked matches. Kazuyoshi Ishii, who heads K1, was also working for Rings at the time, and many of the booking philosophies of K1 come from pro wrestling because of Ishii's involvement in Rings. Satoru Sayama's Seikendo promotion runs November 5th at Yokohama Bunka Gym with Sayama vs. Alexander Otsuka as the main event. This was the show they were trying to book Kurt Angle on, but it fell through. A singles match with JWP's Dynamite Kansai vs. JD's Linus Asuka headlines a December 28th JD show at Korakuen Hall. Here and there. Beyond the Mat finished its 1-week Oscar qualifying run on October 28. Several WCW employees, on location for its own movie, went this week and all liked it. Charles Robinson, I believe, was the only one who thought Wrestling with Shadows was better. The general consensus was that it goes without saying Eric Bischoff was an idiot not to allow WCW any presence in it. WCW wouldn't allow Blaustein to film anything involving the company unless the company had editing power over what aired. McMahon, who was number 2 at the time the movie was largely being filmed, cooperated fully. In a weird irony, one of people featured early on was Darren Drozdov, and if there's a national release or a television release at some point, the movie would almost have to be updated to talk about his unfortunate accident. Actually, it seems just about the only person in the business up to this point who didn't like it was Vince McMahon, who told Barry Blaustein that he thought it was good and didn't feel bad about cooperating with it, but said he didn't like that there wasn't a happy ending. McMahon then told people within his company who hadn't seen the movie that it was a negative knock on the business, outdated 80s terminology for the mindset that everything is either entirely positive or it's negative, and half means it's a knock, that it portrayed the business negatively, and that the company would not do anything to help promote it, which explains no mention of it on television, and also that Mick Foley, who stars in it, hasn't really been allowed to push it while doing the media rounds this past week. The movie was considered a huge box office success in its limited run, as some of the midweek shows sold out, and the movie actually was the highest grossing movie in that complex for the week, for a movie with no television or radio advertising, and did a bigger gross on Wednesday than it did its opening Friday or Saturday nights, which is almost unheard of. After virtually every show, the audience has applauded loudly when it's over. At this point, Universal, which was not expecting a documentary to have box office potential, let alone a documentary on pro wrestling, still hasn't made a decision as to what's next or a national release. The autobiography of the Dynamite Kid, entitled Pure Dynamite, was released on November 1st by SW Publishing, which also does the UK Power Slam magazine. The book is available for $23 for HAL 2 Incorporated, P.O. Box 44, North Syracuse, New York 13212, or for £12.50 in the UK or £14.50 in the rest of the world from SW Publishing, P.O. Box 48, Lancaster, Lancashire LA 14ZE, United Kingdom, or can be ordered at www.dynamitekid.com. We will have a review on the book in next week's issue. The ABC 2020 piece on pro wrestling schools, originally scheduled for November 4th, was moved to November 18th. Court TV is working on a documentary about the current pro wrestling product and its effect on children. The documentary is based on a heretofore unpublicized case in Yakima, Massachusetts, where a 12-year-old babysitter body-slammed an infant to death in January and was recently found guilty of murder too as a juvenile. There was an attempt to try him as an adult. It also notes the other death of a handful of children that have been publicized over the last year from consequences of imitating pro wrestling moves. In response, WCW is expected to start airing PSAs on its television show telling kids not to imitate what they see the pros do on television, similar to the PSA's UPN already runs on SmackDown. The October 31st New York Times Sunday magazine has a story on Lucha Libre. October 30th Memphis Power Pro was filled with angles, most angles that have been seen before elsewhere. Lance Jade and Alan Steele are doing the Outsiders. The ring broke at the TV studio during the first match. Brian Christopher and Spellbinder did imitations first of Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich, and later of Peggy and Tommy Gilbert. They laid down a la Hall and National Nitro for jobbers Ken Raper and Loose Cannon since the ropes were so slack. Since they were still wearing their Gilbert and Rich outfits, they laughed about Gilbert and Rich losing to jabronis. The November 6th New Daisy Theater show has Christopher vs. Gilbert, Rich vs. Spellbinder and Steve Bradley vs. Mike Tierney for the PPW title. Tony Falk came out in costume and asked why they didn't have another Masquerade Mall, the battle royal they held in costume last year that was one of the worst TV shows ever. Dave Brown said they didn't do it again this year because it was the worst show in the history of PPW. I'd like to see WCW or WWF admit that after one of their PPVs. Brandon Baxter spent the show trying to convince Tierney to leave the Jim Cornette organization before they ran him out of the area. Cornette did an interview and said that Baxter raided with all the vile people in history like Adolf Hitler and Vince Russo. When he said Tierney had agreed to forfeit his title match with Bradley next week, Tierney said no way would be forfeit. Tierney then wrestled Robbie D. Tierney had him beat after a power bomb when Glenn Kulka, acting as if he was helping Tierney, accidentally hit him with the title belt, and D got the win. Falk tried to give Kulka candy and Kulka beat him up. CB Wyatt was in a wheelchair with the claim being he didn't want to stand up because he had diarrhea. That was a very funny Jimmy Hart skit from the early 80s. Dave Brown had earlier said Tommy and Peggy Gilbert would be there, and when he called them out, it was Christopher and Spellbinder dressed up like really old people. They claimed the Gilberts had a famous legacy in wrestling and pulled out a program listing Tommy Gilbert vs. Moses as the main event. Christopher, playing Peggy, then told Tommy that Doug wasn't her son and she was messing around with the ice cream man. The show ended with Baxter and Ali getting destroyed by Cornette's organization until Tierney made the save. NWA Worldwide on November 6th in Nashville has a three-way dance with Mike Rapata, Jerry Lawler and Terry Taylor plus Fabulous Ones vs. Corey Williams and Ashley Hudson. The husband and wife fixtures at Nashville wrestling since the beginning of time, that probably not all that many even are aware were pro wrestlers in the 60s, Corsica Joe and Sarah Lee, will team together on the undercard, and they also have an 80s women's match with Leilani Kai vs. Sherry Martel. RF video of P.O. Box 797, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19047 or Fideo.com has tapes of the famous IWA King of the Deathmatch tournament from Kawasaki Stadium in 1995 talked about in such detail in Mick Foley's book. In Puerto Rico, they are doing an angle where the Millennium Family, the Top Hill group led by Ray Gonzalez and Dutch Mantle, wanted by WWC, and they had a TV angle meeting with President Victor Jovica offering to buy the company and bring it back into its prominence of the 1980s. WWC needs some strong angles because Victor Quiñones IWA will be starting up in early 2000 as competition. The IWA television show debuted on October 29th in a Friday night at midnight time slot, doing about a 5 rating, and will be moved to Saturday afternoons in January, which is about the time they plan on opening the territory. The IWA show may be syndicated into the U.S. on major Spanish-language stations. According to an item in The Hollywood Reporter, the markets selected for the Roller Jam Tour were based on current ratings, as the show does the strongest in Nashville, Pittsburgh and Columbus, Ohio. This kind of reminds me of something in the book Roller Derby to Roller Jam talking about Jerry Seltzer, who promoted the Derby in its glory days and TV ratings. It said that Seltzer never trusted TV ratings as a barometer for drawing on the road. Seltzer promoting of tours was based on going on every weekly TV show with the announcer making 2 plugs, one to send for a free copy of the Roller Derby rules and the other to get on the mailing list, and to do so you had to send in the call letters of the station you're watching this program on. He figured that anyone that would go to the trouble of sending that letter was more likely to attend a live game than what TV ratings would show. He booked tours based on the response to the plugs in those markets. John Tenta, wrestling under his old Earthquake name from the WWF, is currently on tour with the British Wrestling Federation. Mike Rapata, formerly Colorado Kid, defeated Big Bully Douglas to regain the NWA North American title on October 30th in Lebanon, Tennessee. Freddie Sabag, whose father Gary wrestles as the Italian Stallion, got a lot of local media attention on October 27th after being bit by a donkey at the Carolina Renaissance Festival in Charlotte. He's okay, but needed some rabies shots. WAFN AM in Fort Lauderdale will be running a weekly Friday night wrestling show from 8 to 10 p.m. with Jim Barcelone and Manny Munoz as hosts. Steel City Wrestling in NWA Ohio, West Virginia on November 13th in Cambridge, Ohio has Bushwhackers. Far North Wrestling on November 27th in West Newton, Pennsylvania has Jimmy Snuka. MMA. Dream Stage Entertainment released a statement claiming that they are not interested in switching their promotion to a pro wrestling worked format and are looking instead to go in the other direction to an all-shoot format, which sounds like an admission they've done worked matches in the past, which everyone knows they have. The amazing thing is this statement was released one day before its president, Naoto Morishita, left for the United States to meet with Victor Quiñones and Jim Ross of the WWF, and about promoting WWF pro wrestling shows. They've added a Frank Trigg vs. Fabiano Iha match for the November 21st Pride show at Yokohama Arena. If they don't go this week to the United States to meet with. For the November 14th UFC Japan show, the Tsuyoshi Kosaka vs. Pedro Hitso match has been officially signed, and for whatever this is worth, it's being billed as a match to determine the number one contender for the heavyweight title. Jason DeLucia's opponent will be Joe Slick, the top-ranked middleweight from Extreme Challenge. The first round of the four-man tournament will be Kenichi Yamamoto vs. Daiyu Takase and Masatatsu Yano vs. Katsuhisa Fuji. There is no opponent for Yoji Anjo with the show just over 2 weeks out. UFCJ wanted to book the idea of Anjo vs. Frank Shamrock with Ken in the corner. One would presume Ken will be attending this show to be in Pete Williams' corner anyway, although I don't know that as fact, and it was even reported as such this past week in Japan, but that won't be taking place as Shamrock felt he didn't have enough time to get ready for a fight. Frank Shamrock is expected to be attending the show to announce that he'll appear in the second UFCJ show in February. The show will be taped in Japan and the tape will be brought to the US, where Jeff Blatnick and Mike Goldberg will do voiceovers from studio for airing 5 days later as opposed to them being there live. John McCarthy will be sent as referee, but there will be very little representation from the American UFC at the live show. At this point, there isn't another UFC show scheduled for the US until February. Shooto ran October 29th in Osaka, drawing a sellout 2,900 at an arena at the Namihai Dome. In the main event, Shooto's top star Rumina Sato beat Phil Johns in 54 seconds with an ankle lock. Shooto's biggest card of the year, the annual Vale Tudo Open Japan, takes place in December with Kaoru Uno vs. Andre Pederneiras and Uchu Tatsumi vs. Alexander Nogueira announced. Murillo Bustamante captured the Absolute Division Championship over the weekend at the annual Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships held annually in Brazil. Pancrase runs November 28th in Osaka, headlined by a return King of Pancrase title match with Yuki Kondo defending against Semishield. There are also two Pancratian Rules Vale Tudo matches with Ben Staines vs. Ryushi Yanagisawa and Shoni Carter, who is a very accomplished Extreme Challenge fighter, versus Takafumi Ito, plus a ranking match with Asami Shibuya vs. Manabu Yamada. ECW. The major weekend show was the TNN tapings on October 30th in Dayton, before 2,500 fans. It was described as a good show, but with inconsistent crowd heat. It opened with Simon Diamond over Nova when Big Dick Hertz interfered. It is said Diamond is starting to get over. During and Roadkill won a three-way over Rotten and Mahoney and C.W. Anderson and Bill Wiles. The Baldies hit the ring and attacked Mahoney and Rotten. During this angle, the Baldies tried to recruit Roadkill, who turned them down, and they ended up beating him up. The idea was for Spanish Angel to use the staple gun, which would lead to New Jack doing a run-in. For whatever reason, he forgot to bring the prop out, and New Jack, not seeing his cue, never went out. Lynn beat Corino. Tajiri Blue missed at Lynn, blinding him. Super Crazy made the save for Lynn, but with Lynn blinded, he punched Crazy and they went at it. Chris Condito beat Spike Dudley. This match mainly a prelude to the ECW main event. The catfight wars continue. This time just 1 week after airing Tammy Sytch getting spanked by Dawn Marie a zillion times with no revenge spot, Sytch and Dawn Marie were teaming together to paddle Francine barebutt. Sytch screwed up the line she was supposed to deliver and forgot to turn Francine toward the hard camera. This quick turn seems to say Paul Heyman is wanting to focus this stuff as quickly as possible on the other two. Sabu pinned Tracy Smothers in a real good match. Van Dam beat Little Guido. Sandman vs. Rhino went to a no contest. It was a short match with everyone running in. Lance Storm wasn't in for the weekend as he was sick. Credible, Corino and Victory all went after Sandman. Dreamer made the save but they beat him down. Raven made the save but Sandman wound up hitting Raven with the cane and Dreamer pulled Sandman off Raven. Nobody could figure out why, If Raven and Dreamer hate each other but protect each other only in tag title match situations, why Dreamer would pull Sandman off Raven. Main event saw Awesome beat Taz in their one and only singles match, described as good but like Taz TV match with Sabu, also anticlimactic. Awesome won with a frog splash in the middle, and it was said the main event had the most heat of the show. Logan Kane, who I believe is the half-brother of Al Snow, got a tryout before the show. Vic Grimes, who at one point was said to be getting another tryout before the show, wasn't there. With attendance at live events having picked up in the last few weeks, morale has also risen. The other shows this week were November 28th in Cleveland drew 1,000, which is well down from a 2,000 plus seat building they were previously selling out in, and November 29th in Warren, Ohio drew 1,200. TNN show on October 29th was taped a week earlier in Poughkeepsie. It's very clear they are pushing the show around the woman, feeling they draw the ratings, and all indications are that is the case, and filling the show up with the men is almost filler. They aired clip after clip of Tammy Sitch's bare ass being paddled by Dawn Marie. In promoting the Dayton show, the biggest house show of the week, they promoted it as the continuation of the catfight wars rather than promoting it around the male wrestlers, and most of the hype to keep viewers tuned into the show was female-based. They continued to show several-year-old WWF footage to promote Sitch. They aired Sabu beating Taz in about 12 minutes after a leg drop through a table. About a 2.5 stars match, but it did come off really anticlimactic as the finish to their many-year-long feud. I understand basic wrestling that Taz needed to put some people over, since everyone put him over, on the way out, with the feeling being he needed a clean loss to Awesome since Awesome never beat him clean, a clean loss to Sabu since they had the long feud, and a clean loss to Van Dam since there was always dispute as to who the top guy was in the company and they hadn't worked a singles match in more than a year. But because of the way wrestling has changed, the way this bout came off as anticlimactic, it's almost as if it would have been better for Taz to have left after the pay-per-view because the end of the story was so much stronger. At the finish, Credible and Storm hit the ring. Credible caned Sabu but Van Dam made the save. Sabu and Van Dam started fighting, which allowed Taz to choke Van Dam from behind while Sabu continued to stomp at him. Storm beat Dreamer in 4:55 when Raven DDT'd Dreamer to set up the pin. The match was designed to build to the catfight spot with Francine and Dawn Marie. Not a good match. After the match, Credible and Storm doubled on Raven, and Credible did his least over catchphrase in wrestling. Raven juiced. The segment ended with Raven attacking Dreamer, but Dreamer getting revenge by laying him out with a DDT. They interviewed Nova, who said he was dedicating his matches to injured Chris Chetty, which of course should guarantee Chetty turning on him soon. Baldy's and During and Roadkill all attacked Nova. Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney came out with sick chair shots. Chaz also laid out Miss Congeniality with a chair to the back. The syndicated ECW Hardcore show was better this week than TNN since it was filmed at the ECW Arena. The show opened with Lou D'Angeli changing his character from Sign Guy Dudley to Lou E. Dangerously, doing a knockoff of Paul E. as a WCW manager. He definitely has more hair than the original. Fans were betting for Paul E. to feud with him, but the last thing Paul Heyman needs is another responsibility at this point. He teased bringing out Sandman, but instead brought out Mikey Whipwreck as a former world champion returning from all the internet rumors. Awesome beat Whipwreck in 5:54 with a splash off the top after a power bomb over the top through a table. Most of the match was Awesome destroying Whipwreck, giving him one short comeback right before the finish. It was a good match for what it was. Tajiri beat Lynn in 11:37 after blowing mist in his eyes and hitting him with a brainbuster. Lynn juiced from a chair shot and was selling his taped ribs big time. Tajiri even used a wrench in the cut. They are now billing Jack Victory as a living legend, which is a stretch even in a business where Larry Zbyszko can get away with such a nickname. This was a good match but didn't have much heat. Lynn used his cradle piledriver but Steve Corino attacked him. Lynn used his finisher on Corino and a pescado on Victory to set up Tajiri hitting the missed spot. Finale was the Raven and Dreamer vs. Credible and Storm match to set up Sandman's return. Not much of a match. Raven and Dreamer, due to respective injuries, couldn't do much, so it was mainly Storm and Credible bumping for them, but the match didn't have much except for a catfight tease early and a second spot where Dawn Marie and Francine went at it, bringing in Rhino, and a non-finish with Rhino setting up double pile drivers on Raven and Dreamer, and the lights went out at the 2 count until Sandman was in position. The response to Sandman's return was incredible. The whole arena was loudly singing the words to Enter the Sandman. Storm was on Wrestling Observer Live and said that while he doesn't have a signed contract with ECW, he has an unsigned agreement that he considers valid. He said he's not looking to go anywhere, but if a huge offer came his way, which he wasn't expecting to happen, he'd be foolish to turn it down. He's also one of the few wrestlers who said if he was in charge of a company, he'd institute legitimately enforced drug testing. He was vocal on the drug issue, as he was in a letter here months back, saying he was pissed off at us for saying as long as you have a physical style of pro wrestling you have to accept some painkiller use. He said from day one in the business, the veterans told him you couldn't do pro wrestling without steroids and painkillers, and he said he's been everywhere from Japan to Germany, wrestling 60 straight nights, to ECW and still hasn't needed painkillers to continue and has never used steroids, and that acceptance of use of them contributes to the major problems with abuse of them and allows for rationalization for using them in wrestlers' minds. James Vandenberg and Johnny Swinger were backstage at the ECW Arena show last week, and there was talk of Vandenberg potentially managing Mike Awesome. Regarding Tammy Sytch's latest escapade, passing out before doing interviews backstage at the ECW Arena on October 23rd, with the excuse being that she accidentally drank someone's soft drink laced by GHB. One would think if this is true that there would be a movement within the company to find out whose Pepsi it was, and when it is discovered, that person should be dumped for bringing something like that which caused someone to pass out into the dressing room in the first place. To come to that second conclusion requires actually believing the first story and then believing this business has advanced past high school when somebody gets drunk and passes out and their friends all get a laugh out of it. It also requires the ability to believe that if you or I or Tammy Sytch was thirsty, they would drink from someone else's open can of Pepsi laying on the floor. I've seen people puff their cigarette butts into open pop cans in the back of a lot of wrestling arenas, and anyone who has been at the ECW arena when it gets hot can envision being thirsty as hell, but I don't know if anyone can envision being thirsty enough to drink from an open can of Pepsi that you have no idea whose it is in the back of an arena filled with pro athletes, let alone pro wrestlers. Whether this is for better or worse, it is clear that Sytch is the one driving the ratings. This is a business, no matter what anyone says, primarily driven by ratings with nothing but momentary concern, only during moments of tragedy, for the human costs that sometimes come with that territory. You can see by the booking that Paul Heyman is trying to transfer as much as possible as quickly as possible whatever drawing power Sytch has from her days as a WWF star, to her giving the rub and hopefully give some real ratings drawing power to Francine and Dawn Marie, but until that happens, she is for the short term more valuable to the company than even Rob Van Dam. Over the years we've seen enough examples in enough people, some of whom are now corpses, of making excuses to cover up what seems to be the obvious. At the New York shows last week, the commission wouldn't allow Super Crazy or Jesus Cristobal, brought in from Mexico known as Zorro there, to work because of incomplete paperwork. They did allow Tajiri. In an attempt to bolster Roller Jam ratings, they shot an angle which will air on December 17th where Axel Rotten, Vito Lograsso, Sal E. Graziano and Little Guido will appear on the show that follows ECW to do what amounts to a run-in helping Prissy Kenneth Loge 3, which makes no sense since Loge's TV role is the buzzkiller wanting to cut out the sex and violence off the show and return it to the 50s. Actually, Loge was excellent in his role as the heel commissioner trying to clean up the game and is better on the mic than most of the ECW wrestlers and would be a natural, if he was slightly toned down from being so campy and unbelievable, as a heel owner doing a corporate takeover of ECW. Just by the name sent, you can see what a rib this one is by ECW. WWF was able to bolster the ratings for Pac Blue on Sunday nights by using Triple H or Chyna in starring roles, and Steve Austin and Rock have drawn legit ratings on network shows Nash Bridges and That 70s Show, but WWF talent like Val Venus, Undertaker and others haven't meant squat for ratings. WCW. Dr. Harvey Schiller quit his post as president of Turner Sports on October 29 to most likely take a job with George Steinbrenner to head his proposed new sports empire built around the New York Yankees and NBA New Jersey Nets. Schiller, who was the overseer of WCW for the Turner/Time Warner empire, had been rumored for months to be leaving for the new venture, and insiders for a long time had expected the move if Major League Baseball owners approved of Steinbrenner owning a team in the NBA. The NBA owners had already approved of the proposed deal, but had continually denied it. How this will affect WCW is unclear. It was Schiller's decision to dump Bischoff and go with Bill Bush, so he had a pretty major impact on wrestling this year. This could wind up being a huge story, depending upon who is chosen as Schiller's replacement and what their attitude about wrestling is, particularly in this era of wrestling when content is based on how far the higher-ups allow the content to go. There was a meeting called before the October 25th Nitro with Bill Bush where they talked about having major problems with the Standards and Practices Department. At the meeting, Ric Flair's name was never mentioned, nor was he buried personally, but there was tremendous heat on him for the Blade job on the pay-per-view. We've already gone through the story of what happened regarding them basically begging to do one match with Heavy Juice for storyline, and trying to convince standards and practices they would be using fake blood rather than a blade job, although Sid did use a blade, and then the people in the department feeling double-crossed because of the second match having even heavier juice and wasn't being stopped. There was also the problem with that match in that the original finish was changed and Charles Robinson was never told, which is why he held up the count at 2 when it was supposed to be the pinfall in that match. Plus Page and Flair booked a ref bump in their match and so many other ref bumps were already booked on the show, and Robinson, who was beaten up by Page, was needed fresh for the Goldberg-Sting match. Anyway, at talent-only meeting, the Nitro girls were booted out, at a time when many of them are pushing for more airtime and to be involved in storylines where they'd be linked to the wrestlers. Kevin Sullivan noted that the company has given them a TV-14 rating as opposed to TV-PG and was cutting the show to 2 hours in January. There was actually the threat given, which no doubt was totally overblown, that if there are more problems with the company not following Turner standards, that they would take away the TV-14 and even shut the company down. Bill Bush said from this point on there would be no more referee bumps without authorization, since so many get booked in the storylines already, that there would be no more juicing or swearing on television without authorization, and that no male could grab or hit a woman unless it was within the context of a match, which is why Asuka was brought back for someone to be the one who actually kidnapped Tori Wilson, since the guys aren't allowed to. November 1st Nitro in Minneapolis drew 8,362, which was 6,632, paying $186,212. From a booking standpoint, this was the best Nitro in a long time. The 3 hours didn't seem too long. The show never really slowed. The production was admittedly beyond awful and some of the angles were really bad, but some of the really bad stuff, Nitro girls, Nash as Vince in the ring where he was fumbling over his words, was probably still effective counterattack booking. Watching the two shows, while neither had a distinct wrestling advantage over the other, Nitro seemed fresh because of so many new people and new angles. Raw, with all its production advantages, came off as stale, in particular, of all people, the character of Steve Austin, who carried the company for so long. I suspect the ratings gap is close to be closing if things keep up like this. They also did it without much in the way of shock TV. When it came to sexual content or swearing, it was ridiculous. They were bleeping out the word screw, which is the basis of every WWF angle for the past 2 years, and piss on Nitro this week. The show opened with Hart yelling at Hall and Nash for interfering in his match with Goldberg even though they helped him win. The plan at this point still seems to be to eventually hook Hart up with them. Hart, on crutches selling an ankle injury, limped to the ring and said Goldberg should be the US champion, since Goldberg in his interview never acknowledged the match the previous week. That pretty much makes it like the belt doesn't matter anyway. Sid came out and said he wanted the belt, and clotheslined Hart on crutches. Hall and Nash came out and handed the belt to Sid. They showed the WCW title tournament bracketing. Somehow DDP is in the second round even though his match with David Flair never took place, but they also had Kimberly act like DDP was injured and gave the impression he'd be forfeiting his remaining matches. Asuka is now dressed like China and promoted the some way. She looks more attractive in her new outfit if you don't mind the mustache. Vampiro beat Berlin in 4:11 when after a ref bump, first the unnamed bodyguard interfered, but then the rock group The Misfits tripped Berlin's leg and kept him from kicking out of the pin. Wright is back to talking English. They were editing out every other time he said screw in his interview. Revolution did an interview, and Benoit came out and they set up Saturn vs. Guerrero for Tori Wilson and Benoit vs. Malenko in a cage. Kimberly quit the Nitro girls in what would have been one of the worst pieces of acting on either show, except that Stephanie McMahon was let loose doing color on the other show. The Nitro girls acted disappointed that their much-beloved leader was leaving them. Bet they really partied big time when that pre-tape was over. Lash LaRue beat Ernest Miller in 57 seconds with a half crab. They acted as if Miller had a knee injury going in. Miller is now the Godfather. They did the Kid Cam Hidman's video camera, spying on Luger and Liz, with the idea that Liz was changing. Anyway, she wasn't. Luger was just pumping up. This was a production nightmare. The video and audio were way off track. It looked like one of the 70s kung fu movies dubbed into English. They don't know how to edit, because when it was over, you could see one cameraman filming the sound guy with a boom mic underneath Kidman and them yelling, "Cut." That's a wrap. They also held the camera on Liz to where she dropped character, started laughing and drinking a soda. At first I thought they were trying to spoof wrestling angles by showing it was an angle, but that wasn't the case. Scott Steiner did a total face interview talking about his legit back surgery. Steiner said he tried every option to avoid the surgery but he was in so much pain he had no choice due to having 3 ruptured discs. It'll probably be months before he can get back in the ring. AC Jazz and Spice of the Nitro Girls started their angle during a routine when they had a really lame pull-apart which made Moolah and Mae Young look like Flair and Steamboat. This followed with the worst backstage fight between the two of them. They looked like fans in the second row pretending to do really bad wrestling moves on each other when they mugged for the crowd. Bagwell beat Stevie Ray via DQ in a strap match when the Harris twins, who are now called Creative Control, interfered. Let's see. If Bagwell was booked to lose and he was having the advantage and those twins started pounding on them, why did the ref, who obviously knows the finish ahead of time, rule him the winner? Jarrett said he didn't take out Elizabeth. He explained that was something his WWF character would do. Nash had been shown putting makeup on to do a Vince McMahon spoof. Anyway, he came out live. He looked nothing like McMahon except he was wearing a McMahon-style suit. Heenan and Schiavone tried to sell it like he looked exactly like McMahon, which was made more pathetic since the crowd at first reacted like they had no idea who he was or who he was spoofing. Eventually the crowd figured it up. Nash was lame, stumbling over his words, but was funny introducing Hall as being sober and having more than one catchphrase and talking about his trouser snake. Hall ripped on McMahon's clothes. These guys needed Jason Sensation bad. The pre-taped segments where Nash was pretending to be Vince were hilarious that aired as the show went on. Hennig beat Disco Inferno via count-out in 3:29 when Disco walked out. Larry Hennig was at ringside and slugged Disco several times. CGAFI, the wrestler who played the role of the Lodi fan, and boy did that storyline go nowhere, came out and Disco walked out with him. They are doing some sort of angle where Disco has tons of gambling debuts and the mob is after him and somehow AFI is his friend. Smiley won a three-way over Meng and Barbarian under hardcore rules. Smiley came out wearing a catcher's mask and chest protector. Heenan called him Roy Campanella, a famous baseball catcher in the 50s who was later paralyzed. And luckily Tony Schiavone translated that reference into the 90s for the rest of the audience that is under 50 years old. This match could best be described as a comedic mess. Smiley did a stretcher job although nothing serious happened to him. WWF at least has a lot better looking female EMTs. Barbarian and Meng both knocked each other out, but how they did it was a mystery since the cameras never showed it nor on replay. Smiley then got up from the stretcher, all healthy, went into the ring, and pinned Barbarian in 6:28. Duggan was shown in a suit and tie backstage with Creative Control watching begging for his job. He talked about beating cancer. The voice of the creator himself, Vince Russo, not God, played with him saying, "I don't care about your cancer or problems, all I care about is ratings." Nash did another Vince segment, copying Vince's fake laugh and saying "get it," spoofing the Super Bowl commercial from last year. Jarrett came out. Luger and Liz came out and Luger apologized. Jarrett ripped on Meng for taking so long to beat Medusa, who he said must be 50 years old at least. If she is, then Jeff would be 45. Meng showed up. Jarrett called Meng a woos. "I think that word went out when I was in junior high school," and Meng chased him but Jarrett ran away. Luger then destroyed Meng with a tire iron. Earlier Luger had been telling Meng all the things Jarrett had said about him. The next production miscue saw the director actually giving Sting and Luger a countdown for another pre-tape where Luger convinced Sting to be his partner and go for the tag title. Guerrero beat Saturn in 5:29 in a pole match with the key to a cage, with Wilson in it, on the pole. Saturn was KO'd and Eddie was supposed to climb the pole. The pole was slippery and he kept slipping when trying to climb. This was one of those moments when time stood still. Kidman and Mysterio Jr. ran to the corner and were clearly in a panic about Eddie not being able to climb the pole. Finally Guerrero jumped off the top rope and came down with the key and opened the cage. Sid cut a promo on Nash saying how he, Vince, had ruined his career over the previous 2 years. Then they all laughed. At this point on my TV, with 40 minutes to go in the show, an ad ran for the November 1st Backstage Blast WCW pay-per-view which started at 5 p.m. Sting and Luger beat Conan and Kidman via DQ in 2:47 in a tag title match. Luger acted as if he was injured. It wound up with all the animals destroying Sting for the DQ while Luger was on the ground selling his knee and not helping. The animals stole Sting's bat. Sting shoved Luger after. Goldberg did a taped interview. In this segment's production screw-up, they listed the movie as being named Slam instead of Ready to Rumble. Medusa beat Evan Courageous in 2:11. Basically Medusa seduced him, he laid down on his back, she started kissing him and he didn't kick out. I was just glad it was over by that point. Benoit beat Malenko in the cage match in 4:27 when Benoit delivered a headbutt off the top of the cage. Thank God the camera caught that awesome move. The camera missed Saturn coming off the cage with an elbow drop. Saturn, Douglas and Malenko tied Benoit's legs and arms to the cage and they began to take liberties with him. The animals came out for the save, but those poor guys, and there were 4 of them, had to sell for one-armed Douglas and Ossia. Ossia was pounding on poor Mysterio Jr. before the animals made a comeback. David Flair then showed up with a tire iron and cleaned house, chasing Kidman away. Flair then unhooked Benoit. As Conan was running off, Sting clocked him and took back his bat. What was the purpose of that? Apparently the cameras also missed, which they did at least show on replay. The reason Revolution was able to get in the cage was Ossia had literally ripped the chain apart with her bare paws. As David Flair was leaving, Kimberly ran him over and left him for dead. Of course it was a stunt man. Nash, as Vince, was at this point knocked out on the dressing room floor and Hall screamed that Brett did it. I'll bet Vince loved the parody right up until that point. Hall beat Sid in the main event. Hall told Sid he'd laid down for him, but then tried to double-cross him. Fans were chanting for Goldberg. This was not a terrible match, which if you've ever seen previous bouts between these two makes it a miracle. After a ref bump and Sid had Hall beat after a choke slam, Hart came out and broke a crutch over Sid. He went after Hall but he escaped and got the pin in 4:53, and then grabbed the US title belt which Sid came out with and left. Lenny Lane was backstage at the show but still wasn't used. Little new on the Ric Flair front. As things stand right now, he's supposed to be brought back in late January in the commissioner role with occasional major show matches. As you can imagine, morale generally is way up, particularly among the mid-card wrestlers who see this as their first chance to get a real shot. Some of the veterans who had been keeping everyone down to maintain their positions aren't as happy, but none of them have officially been phased down, just forced to work on a more of an even keel with some of the physically smaller guys that had been kept down. Harlem Heat may also fit into this category based, in particular, on Stevie Ray's "I'm not happy about this" face when putting over the much smaller, filthy animals on television. Nash and Luger, who seemed as much as anyone to behind the idea that the smaller younger guys simply weren't top talent and convincing others not to help them, aren't complaining since they are being kept strong and it's pretty clear Nash and Hall are going to be given the most television time of anyone. The top guy's gimmick for Disco Inferno, Chavo Guerrero Jr., Psicosis and Juventud Guerrero was dropped. Disco didn't want to be grouped with those guys and Psicosis is injured. Disco is going to do some gimmick where he's grouped with the guy who briefly did the Lodi Worshipper gimmick that was hitting the ring from the stands. Brad Armstrong's new gimmick, teased on Nitro regarding they want him to have more personality like his brother, is to basically steal his brother's gimmick and be a road dog-like character with a name very close to that. Among those on the set during the filming of the movie, now officially called Ready to Rumble, over the weekend were Pee Wee Herman, friends with star David Arquette, Courtney Cox Arquette, wife of same-said star, and Marilyn Manson, who was in for filming on October 29th in the role of the boyfriend of the Rose McGowan character. The October 30th movie filming at the Olympic Auditorium to shoot more wrestling scenes saw about 4,000 people come in as extras to play wrestling fans. There was a Los Angeles Times story about the filming noting that the fans didn't have to be prompted to react in the way extras usually are in similar situations. Don Frye was backstage at the show in Phoenix, but that's more because he lives there. There is some talk of bringing back some of the Mexicans dropped on a per-show basis to work WCW Saturday night. The March Uncensored pay-per-view is tentatively scheduled for Miami. Eddie Guerrero is still bothered by bad ribs and Conan's neck injury flared up after taking Stevie Ray's finisher on October 25th. In the Hall and Nash match against the Strippers on October 25th, the original plan was for the skinny girl with the ridiculous implants who goes by the stage name of Mika, to wear a bikini, but she looked so ridiculous in it that they made her go out there in clothes. Thunder Live on October 28th in San Diego opened with another Juventud Guerrera vs. Evan Courageous match with Sid jumping in at 3:58. Sid challenged anyone in the back and Benoit accepted for the main event. Sid then powerbombed Guerrera and Courageous, who like idiots stood around for Sid's entire interview and tried to shake hands with him after the match. Okerlund interviewed Maestro Robbie Kellum, which with Okerlund there and the guy in a cartoonish gimmick looked like mid-80s WWF television. Maestro beat Prince Iaukea in 3:01 with an STF. Malenko and Saturn beat Silver King and Dandy when Douglas threw Malenko a chain, and he KO'd Dandy with it and used the cloverleaf on him in 4:16. Curly Bill did a terrible interview also reminiscent of one of those real campy bad Iron Sheik level interviews from the 80s. He did note that Kurt Hennig was no longer part of the West Texas Rednecks. They never did an angle to explain this, although I guess if they had just brought out a map and shown the proximity of Robbinsdale, Minnesota to Amarillo they could have made sense out of it. Stevie Ray beat Curly Bill in 3:36. After a ref bump, Curly used his cowboy boot, but Booker T, doing commentary, ran in with a sidekick. Ray used what they called a slapjack but actually looked exactly like a pedigree for the pin. Conan and Guerrero and Kidman beat Regal and David Taylor and Chris Adams in 4:36 when Guerrero pinned Taylor after a frog splash. This match had super heat and was the only match on the show to even have good heat. Lash LaRue beat Chavo Guerrero Jr. with whatever his move that ends up like a Michinoku driver is called in 3:10. Berlin beat Jerry Flynn in 3:55 when the bodyguard threw a punch on Flynn. Backstage, Sid Vicious shoved Chavo into the most dangerous-looking cardboard boxes in history, because it was a very weak shove and Chavo was KO'd deader than Mike Tyson's career. The least WCW would do is hire Mae Young to take bumps for Sid. Ernest Godfather No. Doss Miller came out with 3 hoes. At least he dances a whole lot better than the other guy. Bagwell beat Scotty Riggs in 4:18 with an inside cradle. The story of this match is that Riggs was supposed to win. You know, wink, wink, those evil powers that be who were mentioned more times on the show than Sting, Luger, Flair, Hogan and Goldberg added with the total number of chops Sid took from Benoit in the main event combined, are ordering Bagwell to do jobs, but he ain't do no more jobs. So you see, Bagwell went against the script and pinned Riggs. Why Ref Mickey J would count isn't really explained. In fact, what I just wrote was never explained. They just had Mike Tenay throw really vague hints with the idea that the millions and millions, okay, well it is Thunder so it isn't that many millions of casual fans watching would be so confused they'd have no idea what was going on, and probably not care either. Finally Benoit beat Sid via DQ in 7:22. This was in the 2.5 stars range, which is quite a testament to Benoit. Let the record show Sid took 1 chop. Benoit got the crossface when Saturn and Malenko interfered for the DQ. After the match, Sid showed his appreciation for saving him by power-bombing both of them, and Benoit. The Filthy Animals attacked the injured Douglas and bombed out Malenko and Saturn as the show went off the air. The 3-way tag team title match with Harlem Heat, Mysterio Jr. and Conan and Hugh Morris and Brian Knobbs didn't go anywhere close to as planned at the October 24th Havoc pay-per-view. First, Mysterio Jr. suffered a torn meniscus during the filming of the movie and couldn't do the match. Since he's in a program where he's being pushed, he's trying to avoid surgery which would keep him out a few months and hoping to rehab it and be back in the ring in a few weeks. The planned finish was to be Knobbs being pinned backstage by Heat and Morris being pinned in the ring at the exact same time by the Animals, with Kidman using a shooting star press. The idea was the 2 refs would argue about the photo finish, go to a replay which theoretically would show it as a tie, and the decision would be made it was a draw and have a title match later in the show with Kidman on his own facing Heat with Conan being in the corner selling the shoulder injury. The idea was for Kidman to win the match and the belts for he and Conan. Of course, the timing was totally botched up. Heat scored the pin too early, or the Animals too late. Kidman didn't even do the shooting star press and there was no way they couldn't announce Heat as the winners and new champions after showing a replay. So for those of you compiling record books, Heat won the title in a match they were not scheduled to win the title in. That's the reason Conan and Kidman ended up working twice on Nitro, which led to a poor quarter hour because in 90% of the cases, when a wrestler works twice on the same show, the second match does a poor rating because they were already booked in the match against each other for the WCW singles title tournament. But since they were supposed to be the tag champs all along, they added the match to Nitro where they would get the belts back. They did the DDP injury angle with David Flair since DDP has a major role in the movie as the heel world champion. Can you imagine DDP playing the role of Shawn Michaels? One of the many problems with the movie, besides the bad script, is that in the movie, pro wrestling is supposed to be real. They don't even pretend that anymore on pro wrestling television shows. Time Warner higher-ups basically ordered WCW to do a house show in Atlanta on January 27th at the Phillips Arena in conjunction with the Super Bowl at the Georgia Dome. There will be an attempt to do a lot of PR work for the company revolving around Goldberg's status as a former NFL star with so much media in town for the big game. Vampiro signed his $200,000 per year deal this past week. ICP announced themselves early in the week that they were coming back to WCW, but WCW announced later in the week that they had been released. Until next week. It now appears it'll be closer to 6 months before Douglas can return to the ring after surgery to repair a torn bicep. There was a push within WCW to consider signing Tammy Sytch, as there seems to be regularly, but after last week, that's soured again. Harlem Heat, both brothers earn in the $750,000 per year range, were the latest put in a position to be asked to accept a pay cut using the 90-day cycles for termination and then being offered a new and lower contract. Believe it or not, There are rumors swirling that Juventud Guerrera's future here is in jeopardy because he doesn't speak English well. If he is cut, I'd be willing to bet that ECW would make him into a superstar. WCW has banned all magazine photographers from shooting ringside except from the hard camera position effective with the TV tapings this week. This ban includes not only the US wrestling magazines but also the Japanese and German magazines, which have in the past been allowed to shoot ringside even when organizations were keeping the American publications away. WCW is setting up a payment scale where the magazines can buy high-quality ringside shot photos from WCW. WCW had the advantage from the so-called independent magazine standpoint since WWF had at least banned some of the magazines, feeling it wanted exclusivity of the best photos for its own house organ magazines. Just had a chance to watch the complete unedited Hart vs. Benoit match from Kansas City. It was definitely better without the commercials, and I'd say it was a 4.25 stars match, maybe in some ways better. Had it been held in the 80s, particularly at the Calgary Pavilion, it would have been even better. From a psychological and logical standpoint, it was the best match in the United States this year but didn't have any of the in vogue gimmicks, wild antics or ref bumps and run-ins, which is actually the reason it'll be talked about for longer than 99% of the matches this year. It reminded me of Flair's matches in the 80s, except it was more serious and realistic without the patterned Flair bumps, but Flair's matches also had more flamboyance and breathtaking near falls in the closing minutes. From any standpoint, it was a very close candidate. To me, the best US candidates are this one, Rock vs. Austin from the April pay-per-view, Superheat, a Hardys vs. Edge and Christian ladder match, best high spots, and Juventud Guerrera vs. Blitzkrieg, which deserves in some ways the most praise of all of them because it had awesome heat and even better moves while being a prelim match with two wrestlers that get no push, which usually is a recipe for boring chants. The race car driver that passed away on October 31st at the Marlboro 500, Greg Moore, 24, was someone that Bret Hart knew fairly well and hung out with in the past when Hart attended the Molson 500 the past few years. Moore was in a terrible crash at the California Speedway in Fontana, California, which was repeated to death on all the sports shows that night, in the 10th lap. He was rushed to the hospital and died 1 hour later. Unlike a similar accident at the Charlotte Speedway in May, the race continued although the death wasn't immediate. He died about 1 hour later, but the rest of the drivers weren't informed of the death until the race ended 2 hours later. Post-race awards ceremony was cancelled and the awards banquet was initially cancelled, but due to a request by the Moore family, it went on. Wrestling with Shadows airs for the first time on television in the United Kingdom on November 6. Hart went to England after Nitro for promotional work. Sikosis will be undergoing an MRI on his leg this week. He was injured bad enough he was pulled from movie filming. At least at one point there was a plan for Jushin Liger to come to the US in December, but don't know where that stands right now. While they were in Japan, both Benoit and Malenko were talked with about appearing on the January 4th Tokyo Dome show, but nothing has been finalized about it. Phil Mushnick wrote a column in the October 31st New York Post regarding Ted Turner and Vince McMahon, basically saying that when McMahon acts righteous, most people recognize it's a con, but when Turner does, a lot of people buy it because he has an air of respectability. He then knocked Turner for signing Hogan in the first place in the wake of the WWF steroid scandal, and then for the new direction of WCW, and also ripped on UPN President Dean Valentine for his calling WWF incredibly mild entertainment. He said that if Turner beat McMahon the first time by buying McMahon's steroid-swollen TV characters, then why not try to unseat McMahon a second time by playing McMahon's sexual content game? While the basic facts of the column are right, the reality is that Ted Turner, while an influential co-owner of Time Warner, which owns WCW, has virtually nothing to do with the decision-making process at WCW. For better or for worse, the arrows should be pointed at Time Warner as the conglomerate TNT, or Schiller and Busch, for the current direction. Sting has been filming a TNT movie in Vancouver that's expected to air in early 2000. On WCW Live, Vince Russo said again that he would never show his face on television, which means it would become the first time in pro wrestling history that the most pushed person in the promotion on TV not only doesn't wrestle in main events, but doesn't even appear on TV. He didn't discount his voice appearing on television. Barry Windham took 2 months off to be with his wife who has just given birth. Hogan settled out of court for $15,000 on a lawsuit by reporter Brower Liston, who claimed Hogan battered him after the 1997 bash at the beach when he attempted to interview Dennis Rodman. The paid Nitro crowd on October 25th in Phoenix was 8,160. The 9,360 figure listed was the total in the building. The actual gate for the Halloween Havoc October 24th in Las Vegas was $312,730, with 2,700 comps, and it was 1,273 tickets shy of a sellout. House shows for the week saw WCW Saturday night tapings on October 26th in San Bernardino, California drew 1,894, paying $34,480, and Thunder on October 28th in San Diego drew 1,451, 5,092 total tickets out, paying $45,952. WWF is estimating 330,000 buys for the No Mercy pay-per-view, which would be about a 0.88 buy rate. At this point, the September Unforgiven pay-per-view show looks to be at 375,000 buys, which would be right at a 1.0. Mick Foley's Have a Nice Day legitimately debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestsellers in the nonfiction category. Terry Taylor did come into Connecticut to do some voiceover work on October 27th, but then was sent back home. Apparently he still refused to sign the non-compete clause, and until he signs, they apparently are playing hardball about using him. He has until midweek to make a decision. At last word, WCW had not made him a bona fide offer, but indications were that he may get one. He's apparently telling people he's leaning towards staying with WWF, although it was made clear to him that Vince McMahon is going to be head writer of the TV shows, a position he was trying to get. There may be a monkey wrench concerning a potential return to WCW, which is that there was a complaint made to Human Resources against Taylor which could get in the way of a rehiring. Raw on November 1st at the MCI Center in Washington, D.C. drew a sellout 14,407, paying $421,031. It opened with a Rock interview. Rock got his normal great reaction until cracking on Austin, which drew a few boos. Rock vs. Road Dogg went all of 1 minute before they were brawling near the curtain. All of DX jumped on Rock. Vince started yelling at DX and set up the show. Big Show did an interview with Michael Cole. Big Boss Man threw in tear gas. Cole escaped and Show as near death, taken to the hospital where we were told he was changing colors. Boss Man and Prince Albert also wore gas masks and put the boots to him. In the best television match of the night, Christian and Edge teamed with the Hardys against Too Cool and the Hollies. Of course, no crowd heat, but it was a fast-paced good match. The camera work was WCW-like, missing big spots left and right. It wound up with Edge pinning Crash after a spear in 5:02. Foley and Snow were signing autographed books, with Foley joking about his Snow references throughout the book, and an inside joke that everything really bad in life would be compared with an Al Snow match. Foley and Snow beat Boss Man and Albert in 3:57 when Mankind threw powder at Boss Man. Cameras missed this as well, and Boss Man blinded slammed Albert. Snow then rolled a bowling ball into Boss Man's groin. He rolled out of there and Mankind put the claw on Albert, and Snow hip tossed him through a vertical door for the pin. While this was going on, Venus threw all the books in the dumpster and went to set them on fire. Mankind came out with a fire extinguisher to save his prized property. Chyna and Miss Kitty came out with matching outfits. Chyna's top breed master while Kitty's red slave. I wonder what that's supposed to mean. She did a promo, which still wasn't good, but did have one good line saying that she's taller than Jericho even though he wears higher heels than she does. Stevie Richards came out dressed as Jericho and lost all of 101 before being hit with the pedigree. The real Jericho came out and attacked Chyna, putting her in his Walls of Jericho finisher, and grabbed the belt and left. Austin beat Gunn via DQ in 5:37. Austin didn't get nearly the pop he usually gets. When he did his interview, basically the same interview he's been doing, for some reason it seemed a little stale and didn't get the crowd reaction it usually gets as well. There were boos for him when he made his comeback on Rock. He bled, probably hard way, since his eye was busted. DX did a run-in after Austin hit the stunner. Austin didn't need help as he cleaned house, hitting X-Pac and Road Dogg with chair shots. Venus beat Test via DQ in 4:55. Venus cut a promo on Stephanie, who was at ringside doing the worst job of color commentary since Sherry Martel, and that includes her brother's early work on Heat. Foley attacked Venus for the DQ. Foley chased Venus away. The WWF needs to be careful and not put Foley in a position where he needs to sprint in an angle because he doesn't move fast enough to pull it off. Stephanie then proposed to Test in the ring. Kane beat X-Pac via DQ in 13 seconds after a choke slam and DX run-in. Triple H hit the pedigree on Kane and X-Pac used the Bronco Buster. They aired a Kurt Angle vignette, giving his legitimate collegiate and amateur wrestling background. He was playing such an old-style babyface that it looks as though they are planning on setting him up for a quick heel turn when it doesn't go over. His trade line appears to be that he's the most celebrated real athlete in WWF history, which can be argued, but WWF has never had a full-time Olympic gold medalist on its roster. They had another backstage brawl with Kane attacking X-Pac. Vince and Triple H argued and Triple H challenged Vince to a title match. Shane wound up attacking Triple H and Vince set up Shane getting the title match. Headbangers beat Dudley's Clean in 4:31 when Thrasher pinned Bubba after a DDT. The match had loud boring chants, which is too bad because all four worked very hard. Mean Street Posse attacked the Bangers after the match. Main event saw Triple H beat Shane in 7:34 in a good match. Austin was doing color. One of the reasons his character is flattening is he's becoming more of a traditional babyface, praising people like Vince and the other faces. Kane was the second ref. Rock was timekeeper. Vince was at ringside. Jim Ross kept talking about Montreal and the Survivor Series. They even went so far as to say this is only the second time Vince has been at ringside, with the other being the match in Montreal. Actually, Vince has been at ringside mimicking Montreal in angles so many times over the past 2 years that nobody can even keep up with how many times. Do you remember the Mankind vs. Steve Blackman classic finish? X-Pac interfered first, giving Shane a hell of a spin kick over the guardrail. Kane chased him away. Shane used the pedigree, being the son of the owner does have its privileges, for a near fall that popped the crowd. Road Dogg to the pump handle slammed to Shane on the floor and Rock attacked Dogg and chased him away. After a ref bump, Gunn interfered but Austin attacked him. Triple H hit the pedigree, but no ref. Austin hit the stunner on Triple H, but no ref and Shane was injured and couldn't follow up. Finally Vince grabbed the title belt, went to hit Triple H, who ducked and Vince hit Shane with the belt and Triple H scored the pin. The show ended with Jim Ross wondering whether Vince's actions were intentional or accidental. For the November 2nd Heat and SmackDown tapings in Philadelphia at the First Union Center, they started with 3 dark matches. First, Hurt Angle beat Steve Bradley, followed by Gilbert over Cue Ball Carmichael and Inferno Kid over Jimmy Cicero. For Heat, Bradley beat Julio Fantastico, Sanchez. Venus beat Christian, Dudley's beat Takamichi Noku and Sho Funaki and Midian and Viscera DDQ acolytes. Heat opened with Snow and Mankind beating Hollies for the tag titles. After the match the Hollies fought with each other. Austin confronted JR about Vince costing Shane the title at Raw. JR defended Vince. This turns into a pattern. Brown pin test. Rock confronted JR about Vince. JR again defended Vince. Hardys beat Too Cool. Kane and Tori then confronted JR about Vince. You know where that went. Edge beat Bulldog via DQ when Posse interfered. Vince then yelled at JR because he didn't want him defending him. This led to a DX interview where they claimed Vince had joined DX. This was all a setup for Vince to say that he'd rather join the Ku Klux Klan or work for WCW than join DX. I guess the parody got to him. I figured he'd consider it funny until the spot where Vince was laying on the floor after being punched and they claimed Brett did it. Vince ordered an elimination match with DX versus Shane and Kane and Rock and Austin. Godfather beat Jericho when Richards superkicked Jericho. Bossman and Show went to a double count out. In the elimination match, first X-Pac eliminated Kane, then X-Pac eliminated Shane, then Rock eliminated Road Dogg, then Austin eliminated X-Pac, Rock eliminated Gunn, Triple H eliminated Rock leaving Triple H versus Austin. Vince interfered in the match and knocked out Austin by accident giving Triple H the win. Jim Ross, Bruce Pritchard and Victor Quiñones met on October 29 with Naoto Morishita, the president of Dream Stage Entertainment, about possibly doing business next year. Nobuhiko Takada was not brought along for the meeting. Nothing was finalized nor was anything dismissed regarding potential of doing business. WWF is interested in running one Tokyo Dome show in 2000, either with a pro wrestling organization as its Japanese promoter or with non-pro wrestling promoters. They want the show to be on a Friday night so talent would be back in time for the weekend shows, and there was talk of June or October for the show, although it really could happen at any time. They made it clear that no WWF talent would be allowed to do any shoots and also that they weren't going to put any of their top talent in the position of putting over Japanese and wanted the top talent to work with other WWF guys rather than a Japanese versus WWF headliner as the main event as would be traditional for Japan, such as a Takada versus Austin main event, which would be how things would be first proposed and is a match for a number of reasons that is probably impossible to take place. To cover, since Morishita claimed his company wouldn't be doing worked matches, in Japan the claim was that the meeting was about booking Steve Williams for the January 30th Tokyo Dome tournament, but that isn't going to happen. Quiñones made the connection, bringing DSC into the meeting. The week of November 15th to November 19th will be A&E Biography Week. with in order Steve Austin, Owen Hart, the subject of which was the cover story and a very strong story in the Star Week section of the Toronto Sun over the weekend, Mick Foley plus repeats of Jesse Ventura and Andre the Giant. The newspaper story, written as a review of the film, was strongly negative toward the callousness of the business. The newspaper story epilogue said that Martha Hart wasn't left financially strapped by Owen's death, but she isn't on easy street, saying she's working at the post office and taking continuing education classes. Producer Paul J. was quoted in conclusion as saying, "We didn't want the film to get too polemical, but we asked everybody, so you think this is going to change the way wrestling is headed?" And virtually everybody said no. The fundamental thing is, there is a taste for the dark side in the wrestling audience, and that seems to be where the money is right now. Titan also officially signed Jim Neidhart, 44, this past week. This is something that had been rumored for some time. If you're wondering why Titan would sign Neidhart at his age and with his track record at this stage of the game, because from a logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense, it's because the single most potentially damaging thing to the WWF is a bad verdict in the Martha Hart lawsuit. Because not only the potential award if the jury wants to send a message, but perhaps even more important financially, the result a strongly negative verdict would send to company stock trading or a potential selling spree based on pub leading up to the trial because of potential panic fear of what could happen in court. And please don't think anything in either direction is a given about a unique case like that if it actually goes before a jury. And it serves Titan well to paint the picture that many family members don't hold Titan responsible, and the company even still employs several family members. There was talk of Neidhart and Bulldog forming a new Hart Foundation. We've also been told Neidhart's job is not expected to be as a wrestler, but as a trainer and coach of new wrestlers. The WWF did suggest he work out of the Louisville territory, but Jim Cornette, saying they already have a wrestling school and a trainer, Dan Briley aka Danny Davis, wasn't hot for the idea, so at this point it doesn't look like it's happening. Neidhart claimed that he insisted that he not be dragged into the political and legal mess. In regard to Randy Savage rumors, he's still under contract to WCW and WCW is still using him, and with the lawsuits outstanding, one would think the last thing the WWF would be involved in, and even though a lot of things are done quietly, they've been very careful since the lawsuit was filed on the tampering issue, would be tampering with the contract of someone from a promotion they have a lawsuit out against. Higher-ups claim the odds are against him coming in if he was available, although this being pro wrestling, my feeling is if he were to leave WCW, it would be a matter of time before he'd be here in some form, particularly in his old role on the TV side, as a lot of folks who work that end haven't been favorable about his returning. There would probably be more interest in Ric Flair if he became a free agent. Darren Drozdov's mobility at this point is still limited to being able to sit up in a wheelchair, so he has a long way back, but doctors are happy with his attitude and his progress. There is nothing new regarding feeling or movement in his lower body. WWF still wants Ken Shamrock back, but there is nothing definitive. He's supposed to see a specialist this week regarding his neck injury. Amy Dumas, Miss Congeniality, isn't coming in right away, but it shouldn't be that long either. Christina Laun Pomona hasn't been offered a contract yet. A final decision regarding her hasn't been made. Scott Vick, Sick Boy in WCW, was brought in on October 27th, and it's expected he'll be offered some sort of a contract. Vic showed early potential as part of Raven's Nest, but there was a knock on him that seemed to follow him regarding having lost interest after being taken off TV. A correction on the Gorilla Monsoon obit from a few weeks back. The Monsoon Muhammad Ali angle from the summer of 1976 actually took place at the old Philadelphia Arena, not at the Allentown Agricultural Hall. Expect this as the latest stat coming from Titan regarding its TV demographics, from a letter Vince McMahon wrote to Phil Mushnick after the MSNBC piece. For a long time they've quoted the figure of only 30% of the audience watching Raw being kids and teens. That figure was used everywhere, although the number was always closer to 40% than 30%. Well, I guess with the percentage continuing to increase, the new quoted figure looks to be that only 27% of the audience is 14 and under. In one of the sillier stories we've heard, Walmart has pulled all the Al Snow dolls after a complaint about the doll making light of violence against women. Stemming from complaints from Sabrina Parton, an assistant professor of communications at Kennesaw State University in Georgia, and also from the manager of a Walmart in Cartersville, Georgia, led to the company pulling the Al Snow doll, which comes with a female mannequin head reading "Help Me" scrawled backwards across the forehead. Parton complained that the doll sent a message about brutalization toward women. Walmart, after reviewing the complaint, decided the doll was a questionable item, so they announced November 1st they were removing the Snow doll from all their shelves, probably permanently. Parton said she could understand if this was a novelty item aimed at kids, but the label says it is recommended for children 4 and above, and that makes it terrible. It is so weird, because I could see complaints about a Godfather or a Val Venus doll because of the professions they theoretically represent, or even the idea of WWF selling dolls in general to young children based on the sexual content of the product, but the Snow doll is totally tame. The Snow character has nothing to do with violence against women. That's the Jeff Jarrett WWF character. The Help Me is so clearly a spoof. The movie Exorcist, 1973 movie house shows for the week saw the SmackDown tapings on October 26 in Springfield, Massachusetts draw a sellout 5,762, paying $152,488. October 30th in Madison Square Garden drew a sellout 16,678, paying $447,373, and October 31st in New Haven drew 7,913, paying $177,763. In notes from the MSG show, it opened with Godfather pinning Viscera when Viscera was distracted by the hose. Brown pinned Midian with a splash off the top. The Show vs. Bossman match went less than 1 minute, going to a double countout. Bossman ran from the ring and Show went after him. To have a happy ending, Show choke slammed Prince Albert, Dave Heckner and Tony Garea after the match. Hollies kept tag titles, beating Outlaws when Dudley's interfered. Mankind beat Venus with a DDT onto his book. Mankind promos the book before the match. X-Pac beat Kane when Outlaws interfered with Gunn, hitting Kane with a chair from behind. Triple H came out after the pin and they did a 4-on-1 on him. Bulldog beat Test to keep European title when the Mean Street Posse interfered. Bulldog left but Posse continued on Test until Shane made the save. Rock pinned Jericho, but after the match Triple H and Outlaws attacked Rock. An 8-man saw Edge and Christian and Hardy Boys team up to beat Dudleys and Acolytes when Jeff pinned Devon. Fast-paced match but little crowd heat until the finish. Acolytes walked out after arguing with Dudleys, leading to the finish. Austin beat Triple H via DQ in the main event when Austin was about to win the title and the Outlaws interfered for the DQ. Overall a strong show, with Rock getting a bigger pop than Austin. Austin didn't work New Haven, so the main event was Triple H going to a no contest with Rock when the rest of DX interfered. In the Billboard Rec Sports video listings, WWF videos are now 11 of the top 12 and 16 of the top 20. The top 5 are Rock, Austin, Best of Raw, Austin and Women of the WWF. 3 of the top 6 are Austin videos. The only non-WWF video in the top 10 is a Michael Jordan at number 7. The only pro wrestling video in the top 20 that isn't a WWF video is Wrestling with Shadows at number 13. Bob Backlund set up a table outside Madison Square Garden at the October 30th show to campaign for his upcoming candidacy in the U.S. House of Representatives. Jim Ross reported that Bob Holly has signed a new multi-year contract extension and that Vignettes of Taz will start after Survivor Series, although per agreement with Paul Heyman, he won't start in the ring until January. The WWF hopes to have its Times Square-based theme restaurant open by mid-December. The readers' pages. Russo. Regarding Vince Russo's departure, I for one am glad he's gone. Russo took the wrestling out of the WWF and turned it into South Park with muscles. Besides, he's also responsible for the crassness of the WWF, and how will that work in Turnerland? He can't go to WCW and have one of the wrestlers get blown by a transvestite, or have all the women get their tops torn off. WCW will not allow a pimp or a porn star as a gimmick, no puking wrestlers, no killing of a dog and feeding the remains to the owner, no beer-drinking, bird-flipping wrestlers. How is Russo going to take his near X-rated act to WCW, which won't even allow Norman Smiley to do the big wiggle? And for that matter, why did WCW even want him? They know what his track record is in the WWF, and they've repeatedly said that they don't want to take the gutter route to compete. Now, hopefully, this means less of the garbage that we've seen in WWF. Raw has gotten progressively worse in the last few weeks, to the point I shut it off when that stupid This Is Your Life segment came on and never turned it back on. The only good show is Sunday Night Heat, for the accompanying music and identifying the artists they play, as well as the Deja video, where the wrestlers break kayfabe to discuss their match. Now's that new. Am I the only one who sees a serious decline coming in the WWF? The world title means nothing. Vince McMahon's win was nothing more than a gimmick to spike the rating for SmackDown and have no champion going into the unforgivable pay-per-view. Helmsley isn't over at all since breaking away from DX. The title match on SmackDown with Rock officiating would have been a lot more entertaining if the title wasn't on the line. The IC belt is even more irrelevant. It's held by a misogynistic loser who needs a big-boobed blonde to get any heat, and his top contender is a woman. If it isn't lame enough, he hit Jackie and the grannies as hard as Bradshaw hits the men. But at least Bradshaw is hitting men. Reuniting the Outlaws was a desperation move with no build-up. The tag scene is actually pretty good until Mideon and Viscera are figured in. Who is the hardcore champion? And does anybody care? Big Show is a big flop. Chris Jericho is losing all his steam. He hasn't even had a notable clean win yet. Curtis Hughes is dragging the guy down. He's done nothing but yap on the mic and they have him come across as a chicken shit. They are pissing away the talent they worked so hard to get. I don't think it's a matter of size. Crash Holly is smaller and has a better angle. The WWF has more wrestlers in a holding pattern than All Japan has on its entire roster, and yet it keeps signing more talent. Their shows are a bad SNL routine with an occasional wrestling match thrown in, and heaven forbid we should ever see a clean pin. Put the world title on Rock for 6 months and let him feud with a heel Austin and Undertaker. Tell Triple H to be patient. He seems to have the notion that he's entitled to the world title even though his push has been a flop. How long was Bret Hart in the company before winning the title? Put the IC title on Edge. Christian is very good, but he's just along for the ride. Similar to how Marty Jannetty was with Shawn Michaels. Let the Dudleys, Acolytes, Outlaws, Hollys and Hardys fight for the tag titles. The tag team scene has the potential to be more interesting than the world title scene at this point. Send all the wrestlers stuck in a holding pattern to All Japan for a few tours. Mitsuharu Misawa needs the help and look how much it improved Bradshaw. Kenta Kobashi will make a good wrestler out of Sean Stasiak and Val Venus, if anyone can. And they should bring in Atsuko Mita, Mima Shimoda and Mayumi Ozaki to teach Ivory, Luna, and all the men for that matter, what a hardcore match really is. Lose the women who can't even deliver a line, which is all of them. Sign Dawn Marie and Tori Wilson, because that's all the women they need for eye candy and personality. Be more careful with public appearances. I cringed watching Austin and Rock at the Emmys. Austin was only slightly better at the MTV Awards and on that teen show award show. When wrestlers are out of their element they often look uncomfortable, and when they can't do their shtick, they end up looking bad. And finally, cut this monthly pay-per-view. Enough already. WCW will probably be the first since their buy rates are almost as low as ECW. The WWF won't be the first to cut back, but they should be smart and be the first. 6 pay-per-views instead of 12 will allow them to stretch out angles and not burn them up in a month. Andy Patrizio. Los Angeles, California. DM, we aren't about to see a cutback in the number of pay-per-view shows since the pay-per-view revenue is basically the money keeping the companies in the black. WCW is hurting, but it isn't because they are running too many shows, it's because they turned off their audience. Pay-per-view will probably go down significantly across the board next year, but the reason isn't because there are too many pay-per-view shows, although there are if you add all the small shows in, but because there is too much free weekly television. So by Sunday, who wants to pay $30 to watch 3 hours of wrestling? Imagine my surprise when I discovered Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara had jumped to WCW. When the shock wore off, I started thinking about it and realized this is a great thing for the WWF for a couple of reasons. I was like most people when the NWO angle took off. I tuned in week after week, clicker in hand, and basically wore out the buttons between watching the home team and the other guys, who at the time were simply putting on far more compelling television. More often than not, Nitro got the lion's share of my attention span. But the initial shock had no payoff behind it. This led to the downward spiral of WCW and the ascension of the WWF under McMahon, Russo and Ferrara. The success of WCW was a wake-up call for the WWF. Vince was forced to get out of his complacency and needed to find a new winning formula. The result was the WWF product improved, although I'm one of many who think more wrestling and less storyline should be the way to go. But it's hard to argue with success, as the 8.4 quarter hour on Raw for a segment that made me ready to hang myself shows. So I think this is good for 2 reasons. WCW will improve if Russo and Ferrara are left to their own devices. If they are given final autonomous authority over the booking, WCW will finally, for the first time ever, become a logical and orderly universe and people will tune in again. In turn, McMahon will up the ante again, and the result will be that everyone wins. This will force McMahon to take things up a notch when they are already sky high. And maybe McMahon will even inch back to what he really knows, which is wrestling. I'm happiest when there is more than one product competing for my dollar. No doubt there will soon be 2 compelling wrestling shows on Monday night in the next 6 months. Should be incredibly interesting. A thought occurred to me as I listened to the Wrestling Observer live interview with Chris Benoit. I felt for a long time that the huge guaranteed contracts the alleged top guys in WCW receive was one of the biggest problems in the company. Most of these guys got the big contracts based on their previous standings in the WWF. Unfortunately, with very few exceptions, they all left their working shoes in the WWF. These guys in the WWF were paid based on how they got over. The harder they worked, the more money they made. WCW guys, in contrast, make the same money no matter what. A lot has been made of the fact that even though WWF guys have downside guarantees, their guarantees are less than what WCW offers comparable talent. WCW guys snickered when Rock signed with WWF for a downside rumored to be in the $400,000 range. He'll probably be good for a couple of million in 1999. Had he signed with WCW for $850,000, in hindsight, he'd have shorted himself, unless he got over to the same degree and had incentives built into his contract. From what I can gather, most WCW contracts are not incentive-based, hence Goldberg's renegotiating earlier this year. Ironically, Goldberg would probably still make more money if he was working for the WWF, even though his guarantee would be lower. Let's say Russo and Ferrara push Benoit and he hits over. A lot of this is based on the fact that Russo seems open to elevating Benoit, judging from what Russo said on your show. Let's say Benoit's guarantee is $450,000. Will Bill Bush accommodate a Benoit, or anyone else who benefits from a new regime the way Bischoff accommodated Goldberg? If Benoit can become the next Austin, will he make Austin money? You've talked about how the WWF payoffs are a much smaller piece of the total gross than WCW. But I would imagine we would see that, relatively speaking, there is probably a sense of rhyme and reason to what the wrestlers make. From what I've read, Scott Norton makes almost double what Benoit and Eddie Guerrero do. Do you even establish a baseline salary scale if you decide to renegotiate with talent? If Norton makes $800,000 and business goes up, should his pay also go up? Or is it now simply in line with what he should be making? And if Norton doesn't like the answer, will he sit at home injured and collect paychecks without contributing to the company? What of other guys we would consider overpaid? Will WCW have any latitude in restructuring Rick Steiner or Lex Luger's contract to reflect their true value to the company? What are the incentives for the top guys to even listen to Russo? If they won't make any extra money if WCW has a resurgence, will they even cooperate? You're talking about a lot of guys who have to be bribed to work house shows, who has creative control clauses in their contracts. Ask McMahon how much fun those clauses are to work with. The fact of the matter is most of the wrestlers show little to no pride in their work or their company. Christopher Cassidy, Tewksbury, Massachusetts. Response from Dave Meltzer. I think it's a management problem in WCW more than the way they do business with contracts. The All Japan headline wrestlers, who are still the guys who as a rule put more physically into their matches than wrestlers from any other company, work on guaranteed money deals, and it doesn't make them lazy. The WWF wrestlers in the 80s with incentive-based contracts had poor work rate in the ring, while the Crockett wrestlers with guaranteed contracts worked much harder. It has to do with management, and in WCW, you weren't rewarded for working hard, so most of the guys didn't go out of their way to work hard. Since so many have abused their WCW deals, which I believe is more a management problem over signing people with spotty track records to begin with, the current thought process seems to be that guaranteed contracts make for lazy employees, forgetting so many examples current and in the past that prove that not to be true. Largest crowds. The October 10, 1934 Jim Londos vs. Man Mountain Dean match needs to be removed from the 10 largest crowds list. The announced crowd of 38,756 was exposed by a small independent newspaper that checked with the State Boxing Commission, and not just promoter Lou Darrow. For the record, the real paid attendance was 23,565 for a gate of $40,922. This was not a Los Angeles record at the time. I believe the record was $42,000 for Gus Sonnenberg versus Joe Stecker. It's obvious Darrow made up a number to top the 35,265 figure, the made-up number used by the Chicago promoters of the Strangler Lewis vs. Jim Londos match that took place 20 days earlier. The Los Angeles Times picked up the story on the fake number the next day, explaining their original mistake by saying, when Lou Darrow gets excited, his eyes get twice their normal size, and then he starts seeing double. Steve Yohei. Montebello, California. When talking about booking backwards combined with your item on the Buddy Rogers vs. Pat O'Connor match that drew 38,000 fans, that show was set up by a big show the previous year at Comiskey Park which saw Rogers go over Bearcat Wright and O'Connor go over Yukon Eric which drew 30,200. That was the first year of the Fred Kohler-Vince McMahon Sr. collaboration, using McMahon's 2-hour taped matches from Bridgeport, Connecticut interspersed with Kohler's live localized interviews, some of which was hilariously inept as he wasn't a polished television personality. Dennis Chida. Chicago, Illinois. Foley book. I want to add my 2 cents on the Foley book. In a way, I'm almost embarrassed that I got so much enjoyment out of Foley's hardcore matches. I think we tend to just look at wrestlers as stunt men that have no feeling and we never stop and remember that these guys have wives and kids that need these people healthy a lot more than we need to see them take a great chair shot or a barbed wire baseball bat shot. I work for the TBI unit part-time for the local ARC, working mainly one-on-one with an ex-boxer who is now developmentally disabled from all of the blows he endured to the head. As I watch this man struggle through so many simple activities that we take for granted, I wonder how some of these wrestlers are going to function later in life. It's truly sad. No form of entertainment is worth what could possibly happen. From now on, I'll enjoy it a lot more when Mick pulls out the damn sock. Kevin Dillon. Albion, New York. ECW. ECW has totally fumbled with its TNN shows so far. The talent is so misused it's embarrassing. All I see on TNN is Super Crazy and Yoshihiro Tajiri. I'm a fan of both, but I'm puzzled as to why they get so much television exposure compared with everyone else. The shows come off far too edited and canned. Rhino has been more of a presence on the shows than Lance Storm, Justin Credible or Sabu. Masato Tanaka vs. Mike Awesome is the main event on the next pay-per-view. It'll be a good match, but it has been done to death, and why are they putting a non-ECW in a pay-per-view main event challenging for the world title? All the stuff with Storm, Credible, Lynn, Sabu and Van Dam has become a mess. I can't tell who is feuding with who. All I know is that they have great matches. Balls Axel and New Jack are stale and have been for a long time. Chris Condito once again is overshadowed by his untalented fiancée. ECW has lost Auntie Foss, Tracy Smothers and Tommy Rogers and replaced them with DeBaldis. Heyman is a genius. Simon Diamond is a stupid gimmick, and who wants to see Uganda or PN News? David Cash hasn't been given a chance yet. They show pay-per-view matches on television for free, which is absurd for so many reasons. ECW is the only promotion that I like and would like to see them do well on TNN, but they first must realize that a lot of changes have to occur if that is ever to happen. Shannon Stewart. Savannah, Missouri. I don't understand how you believe WWF and ECW have a cozy relationship. If there is a relationship, the WWF is reaping all the benefits. The WWF rated their world champion, world tag team champions and one-time comedy kingpin, Meanie, and have tried to acquire Nova and their best potential in-ring woman performer. What has ECW gained? When have Mick Foley, X-Pac or Al Snow showed up as mystery partners? When have the Hardy Boys faced the Impact Playas? Oh, I forgot. ECW has access to Vic Grimes. Austin should be turned heel in a series of GTV segments ripping the fans on his cell phone for buying his bogus act. Why has Colorado Kid been overlooked by the top promotions? What happened to Berlin's valet? Kevin Convery Jr. Kenmore, New York. Response from Dave Meltzer. Obviously the two have a relationship. WWF has supplied ECW with talent such as Snow, Furnace and LaFon, etc. at no expense to ECW. WWF didn't make an offer to Sandman. They didn't at first even make a substantial offer to Taz until Taz made it clear to them that he wasn't going to stay. Colorado Kid is under contract to WWF. Berlin's valet was dropped when they gave up on his character after all of 2 or 3 weeks. Right now they're keeping him on television largely to push his bodyguard as a future star, not him. Deceptive practices. Deceptive practices have been commonplace in pro wrestling for years, but a bold new chapter in bait and switch tactics was written last Saturday in Vineland, New Jersey. The Eddie Gilbert Memorial Show boasted a somewhat intriguing mixture of established stars and newcomers, but the announced lineup in no way mirrored the card presented. Prince Albert, Draws, the Mean Street Posse and Tom Brandi were all advertised on the NWA New Jersey website and in press releases for weeks, but none were in attendance. Eddie Gilbert's own brother demonstrated how strongly he supported the event by no showing with no explanation given to the paying public. Following intermission, WWF announcer Kevin Kelly stated that WWF performers were pulled from the show to participate in a softball game to benefit the Michael Bolton Foundation, but no refunds, nor any adequate WWF substitute stars were offered. Granted, this was a fundraising show for scholarships in Eddie's name, and the NWA New Jersey wrestlers themselves put on a great effort. But promoters should learn that fans who have been burned will eventually stop buying tickets. Instead of writing lineups on an Etch-a-Sketch, promoters should demand some sort of an appearance guarantee to prevent a slew of no-shows. While Public Enemy and John Cronus were welcome surprises on the card, they couldn't even begin to fill an 8-performer gap. When promoter Dennis Coralizzo picked up the microphone toward the end of the evening, one lonely voice in the crowd cried out, "Where's my $10, Dennis? You stole my $10. While I wouldn't go that far, I and many others couldn't help but feel that a better response than, "Shut up. I'll comp you for next year's convention" was merited. Fool me once, shame on you. Name withheld by request. Big Show Angle. By Vince McMahon's own admission, WWF is a soap opera. Therefore, I have no problem with Big Boss Man offering a few dollars to an officer of the law to inform Big Show of his father's death. This angle is really no different than Terry Runnels' miscarriage or Val Venus stealing Rocco the Socko. Just another soap opera storyline. Did anyone scream tasteless when JR got shot in Dallas? It was just a television show. In the UK, the soap operas, which top the ratings every week, revolve around the local public house. Raw is War on Monday Night are just storylines centered around a wrestling ring. The Owen Hart tragedy was the exception. The most Owen over the edge episode of Raw was clearly different. This was very real and the audience knew it. The Bossman vs. Big Show angle was all show, and yes, the audience knew it. A few things to remember when comparing UK ratings of Raw and Nitro. The two shows go head-to-head every Friday night for 90 minutes, 10 to 11:30 p.m. Raw also has a replay early Saturday morning and Nitro doesn't. Many fans watch Nitro and tape Raw. The reverse is impossible unless you own 2 satellite systems. Phil Jones. Cardiff, Wales. Response from Dave Meltzer. The WWF, WCW and ECW are all different than a soap operas in one theme. They all admit that the shows are scripted, but then attempt a second layer of storyline where they try and pretend certain aspects go against the storyline and are not scripted to make fans believe some of it is real. No soap operas do that. Even the smartest of fans can't tell the difference, and the line is so blurry few fans can't. Was the Survivor Series finish a real double cross or an angle? Were the numerous spoofs of it for the next year real double crosses or angles? Were Hogan and, for that matter, Medusa's interviews on the October 11th Nitro, them shooting out of storyline or scripted interviews? You probably know the difference, but the majority of viewers aren't sure. If the majority of the audience knew Big Show's father had died some time back and this was all an angle, it would be no different than anything in a soap opera. But pro wrestling pretends to be more real than that. Until pro wrestling, while using the term soap opera, really becomes a pure soap opera, where the characters don't mix between their stage names and then use their real names in angles to attempt to get the audience to believe this part of the show is real. On Frasier, just as an example, you don't, in trying to make the audience think some of it is real after a compelling scene, have the character playing Niles go to the character playing Frasier, "Kelsey, I just want you to know, and this is a shoot, I was honored to do that scene with you," in a cutaway clip in the middle of the show. The very goal today of writers, and most will admit it if you ask them, is to present the illusion that of course this is all scripted, except throw a swerve and big money angle out there with the idea that this isn't part of the show. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were clearly told to and attempted to step out of character, using their exact reactions made famous at Over the Edge, to draw a parallel of this angle to that reality, when talking about this angle to make fans think it wasn't an angle. Sure, it was quickly made clear it was by the end of the show that the father hadn't died and it was an angle, but a large percentage of the audience does believe Paul White's father is at this moment suffering from terminal cancer. At the screening of Beyond the Mat, that angle came up afterwards, and one person in particular, whose family is in a battle with cancer and found the storyline particularly touching a bad nerve, and was a smart fan, as if most aren't to a great degree these days, who told me how bad taste he thought it was to use the cancer as a storyline. When I informed him Show's father had actually died some time ago, and the reason he was able to execute more emotion in delivering the lines than wrestlers usually do is because he could use his father's real death to create his emotional response, he was even more sickened, finding out it was something fake they were trying to convince the audience was real than exploiting something real to get somebody over. There are arguments that most young children and teenagers who watch often can't tell the difference between what's real and not real on a wrestling show, but the truth is, virtually nobody knows. Probably the single most savvy, experienced person in the business who knows every trick there is and worked for years for Vince McMahon was on the phone with me for 45 minutes the night Owen Hart died, trying to convince me it was an angle because his claim was I didn't truly know how sick Vince McMahon really was. There are several in the WWF, including some higher-ups, who weren't comfortable with this angle for that very reason. Beyond the Mat. Just came back from a showing of Beyond the Mat and had a couple of observations. The first thing I noticed was the mixed bag of crowd. There were some true fans, some people who were there for no other reason than to see glimpses of The Rock and Stone Cold, and others that didn't fit into either category. I think the movie has dome appeal to the general population. The Fad fans popped big for Rock and Austin, but I don't think they appreciated the movie. I think the movie appeals more to non-fans than to Fad WWF fans. As for the movie itself, I found Mick Foley to be a very likable guy, but also sad. He can't put his body through this much longer. What will he do afterwards? Will Vince McMahon have a position for him after his day of taking awesome bumps is over? Terry Funk speaks for himself. The man is truly amazing. It was great to see Terry and Mick together during that interview segment. I went into the movie expecting to really despise Jake Roberts. When I left, that wasn't the case. I felt sorry for him more than anything else. He's been dealt some pretty shitty hands. Granted, if I knew him, he'd be the kind of person I'd avoid at all costs. But I still couldn't help feel bad for him. It was really a trip to see flashbacks of the 80s Jake as compared with today. What a change in a relatively short period of time. The only character I found myself disliking was New Jack. Don't know why. Maybe I just never liked him after an interview I read of his in the Lariat. But for some reason, I didn't like that part of the movie. I also got the feeling the people who gave him the audition weren't impressed with his talent or his looks or whatever, as they were too intimidated by him to let him know what they thought. In conclusion, it's a great movie and I'd recommend it to anyone. Wes Daniel. Norwalk, California. Response from Dave Meltzer. I can't imagine Titan not having a position as a goodwill ambassador type of thing for Foley when he decides it's time to stop wrestling. I caught Beyond the Mat and it's an excellent film. I agree it was worlds better than Wrestling with Shadows because Shadows had one wrestler featured and this had 3 featured, and many others who are given a look into their lives. I think one of my favorite scenes is when Mick Foley asks his dad behind a closed door if he can wrestle with the kids. The audience loved that. I think everyone came off positively except for Roland Alexander. I know him personally and I had a tryout in his camp 5 years ago. The speech he gave the 2 recruits in his office was word for word the same one he gave me. Don't get me wrong, he's a very nice man and is very sincere in trying to get his boys jobs in the Big 2, but he's also very stubborn. You can't talk him out of anything. The debate after the movie was very interesting. Some people still don't get it. Being outraged by anything on a wrestling show is sickening. Everyone is done so tongue-in-cheek that I laugh and laugh. I think Mick Foley will become even more of an icon after this film is hopefully released. It appeared to me this film was meant more for television or video, but it was great fun to see the TV wrestlers on the silver screen. The film was 102 minutes and I wish it was another 102 minutes. I could have watched it for hours on end. Greg Davidson. Van Nuys, California. Ventura. 2 of the biggest interests in my life are politics and pro wrestling. I never thought these 2 would come together like they did in the past 2 years. This trend has made my weekly reading of The Observer even more enjoyable. You're a better political analyst than most of the people who do it for a living. Your explanation of the Jesse Ventura phenomenon was better than anything I've read in the mainstream media. In your most recent issue, you asked why registered Republicans are 4 times more likely to order a pay-per-view than registered Democrats. The biggest reason would be that men are more likely to be Republican and the pro wrestling audience is largely males. PPVs are not cheap at $29.95 and on average, Republicans have higher incomes than Democrats. I also think some of the elements in today's pro wrestling would turn off politically correct Democrats, though it might also offend Republicans with traditional social views. Dan Billings. Bodenham, Maine. WCW in England. Nitro has beaten Raw several weeks in the ratings in the UK and the worldwide show, which actually has some good matches on it, but its format is so lifeless and boring still has more than double the viewers of Raw and it has prime-time network exposure, which is a first for American wrestling in this country. When you take into account that TNT Europe isn't part of the Sky Digital package, while the Sky Sports channels obviously are, and Nitro still beats Raw without being available to digital subscribers, which is really taking off here because of the competing digital companies who are giving away the decoders, and the satellite and subscription fees are the same as an analog subscription, Then surely if TNT was available to people with digital equipment, Nitro and Thunder would have even higher ratings. With TNT Europe being the only channel that hasn't made the switch to digital from the old analog channels, it seems like there's a lot of potential being wasted. With WCW ratings at their highest now, it's time for WCW to make a play for the market by televising their pay-per-view shows live. Even on Sky Box Office, the fees are nothing like US pay-per-view charges, and I'm sure the majority of people who watch WCW TV every week get less out of it without being able to see the pay-per-view coverage as opposed to WWF, whose pay-per-view are televised free every month in this market. If they aired their PPVs, it would open WCW up to wider audience because fans would be able to see the blow-offs at the end of the programs. It seems like WCW could make the UK market their own. You mentioned the plan is to tape Nitro in the UK in February, but surely this would be more successful, with total exposure here. Chris Hodgson. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine.